G'day, May 40 here. It's a few days after the election. Let's try to understand what happened, what's going to move forward with the Trump administration. This is the analysis late Friday from Mark Halperin.
If I write a book, I'll have to write about it. Biden's fault, Harris's fault, Pelosi's fault. That's a.
So Halperin believes that Kamala Harris could have won this election.
Part of the Democratic bucket, but so is this question of what should the party stand for. You'll see a lot of op-ed pieces, including by some members of Congress. Or O'Connor has a great piece in the Boston Globe today. I recommend to you about where the party needs to go. And then they have their own decisions to make about how to interact with the White House starting in January. Are they going to vote, for instance, for Trump cabinet nominees, even though they may not need their votes to be confirmed? What will the posture be? And that will be in early January, so not much time for them to figure out the sort of symbolism of how they're going to interact with Donald Trump. And then there's in all of this Democratic panic, and I'm not the first to say it, incredible and delightful that there aren't riots in the streets. That's really good. And I think there's going to be some uncomfortable moments for folks as we head towards January and the inauguration when it sinks in. But I think there's a greater acceptance than I thought there would be. I still think there's a lot of mental anguish.
It surprised me, all right, the lack of riots and generally the muted reaction by the opponents of Donald Trump. And it shows that reality matters. All right, if Donald Trump had just won the Electoral College and not won the popular vote, I think there would have been a much more intense reaction against him.
But a greater acceptance, in part because Donald Trump won the popular vote, would have been a lot worse for unity and appreciation for the result if he had won the Electoral College, but not the popular vote. You see a lot of crazy things, including people in journalism writing stories about how Justice Sotomayor should step down now so the Democrats could confirm her replacement before January. It's such a crazy discussion on so many levels, procedural, politics, etc. But it's testament to the lack of Democratic unity about what went wrong and what to do about it, that they're spending any time floating this idea of a resignation and a lightning fast confirmation. The media continues to be out of touch. I'll get to the Trump news in a second. The media continues to be out of touch. CNN's old, new, current media reporter, Brian Stelter, was forced in his newsletter to address the question of how did Democrats miss the story of Trump's victory? And I was curious to see how he'd address that, because none of the actual answers or possible actual answers fit in the least in his propaganda about Donald Trump and about the Democrats. And so what he said was the Democrats missed the story because too many of the reporters are privileged. Too many of the reporters are privileged, and therefore they didn't see the story. Now, I will tell you, Brian Stelter, I'm very privileged. I'm very fortunate. My family's very fortunate. I didn't miss the story. So being privileged does not mean you can't see the story. And by the way, I was privileged 8 years ago too, and I saw that Donald Trump might win.
Arguing that the news media missed the story because they're privileged, I think that's an incredibly weak argument, right? Because so many privileged people could see the appeal of Donald Trump.
And I'm not the only one. I'm not here to pat myself ostentatiously on the back, but these various straw men that they're throwing up, Harris couldn't have won, or people miss the story because they're too privileged. This is all silly. Brian Stelter also wrote in his newsletter, as he always does, disapprovingly of employers like the Washington Post telling their employees to work in the office 5 days a week. That's a crazy mindset, but that's the mindset. Okay, with President Trump, Iranian plot. Justice Department says there was an Iranian plot to kill Donald Trump. That concept had been out there, but people were actually indicted. That's a massive story. Even if he were simply a former president as opposed to president-elect and a Republican frontrunner for the nomination for 2 years, that's an incredibly big story. It's getting big play in the media, but I think, unfortunately, we've become kind of a nerd to this, and because people have tried to kill him twice, but also, and by the way, the motives of the two people who tried to kill him, Americans tried to kill him, are still not clear, and whether they were working with others. if this were attempted assassination of Barack Obama or Kamala Harris or Hillary Clinton, it would get a lot more attention. President Trump did a call with President Zelensky.
Right. That's a killer point, that if this had been an attempted assassination of Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton or Kamala Harris, it would get a lot more attention in the news media. Now, Susie Wiles has directed the most disciplined Trump campaign that we've seen yet. She'll be the new chief of staff.
I don't want to, pretend I know who Susie thinks in the clown car. But if you look at the arc of the time since Susie was put in charge, since shortly after President Trump left office, first of his political affairs in the PAC and then of the campaign, they have had some moments where the clown car has snuck into Mar-a-Lago, like when he had dinner with a white supremacist. Mm-hmm. And I think that Susie is part of why people have such respect for her. Is she understands a lot of different dimensions, including press. She's worked with the press a lot and politics, but I think she just doesn't want to have a news cycle disrupted by somebody who's going to be a bad story. And there are a lot of people like that around Donald Trump. So I'd be curious, now that you raise the concept, I'd be curious if maybe bring Susie on two-way and just show her a bunch of headshots of people and say, clown or not clown.
Yeah.
I have some guesses, but I'm not gonna make them tonight. How are you feeling?
So what exactly does it mean that Susie Wiles helped Trump run a much more disciplined campaign?
The thing I think is that you may now see the longest serving chief of staff in a Trump presidency in history, because I don't even remember her name, but I think the fact that she's a woman
Susie
may
Wiles.
bode well for her longevity.
Mm-hmm.
I think Trump gets threatened by, I don't think he imagines there being the possibility of an alpha female. So I don't think he gets as threatened.
And there's signs that he defers to her. I mean, she doesn't come across as an alpha female, but I don't know if you saw Trump was giving a speech and then he, went off script and started talking about how if someone's going to shoot him, they'll have to shoot through the fake news first and he would be okay with that. I don't remember exactly how he put it, but that was the idea. And she came out not onto the stage, but like in front of the stage on the side, I believe, and just kind of stood there and he looked at her and then he went back on script. Like it was some sort of signal.
Wow.
It was the clearest example, I think, of him actually deferring to somebody else.
You gotta find that. You gotta find that video. That's a skeleton.
Yeah, that's a great anecdote. All right. Trump starts going off script, talking about if people are going to shoot him, they should have to shoot through the press gallery. And then she comes out on stage and just off to the side, not on stage, but just off to the side. And he gets the message.
Last 48 hours on my Facebook page or in my Instagram, people have talked about how deplorable and how awful Trump people are. I know that's not true. I know that's not true. And also, you're never going to pull them to your side by making them think that you don't respect them as people.
Accomplish a lot. I also, I'm excited to see what Elon Musk does. I would like to see the government cut spending. I'd like to see us make a dent in our national debt. And I'm just optimistic. I'm really excited.
Listen, and I think it was a really good pick. I'm sure Mark Cuban is quite concerned and confused because he's surrounding himself by yet another talented, smart, strong woman. But good pick for Donald Trump right out of the gate.
All right. I chided Hogan for being late. Hogan, I thank you for joining us on a Friday night. Very generous of you. Elise and Michelle, Hogan made reference to a 1970s television ad campaign for E.F. Hutton. Have either of you ever heard of that ad?
Right. When E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. And it is applicable to Susie Wiles. When Susie Wiles talks, people listen. This Hogan bloke is the former deputy White House press secretary, very likely to have a position in the new Trump administration.
Heard things like Republicans are morally bankrupt and Texan Latinos voted for Trump because of the border crisis, not because of the border crisis, but because they're misogynist and sexist. And as a Texan, that's really hard to hear. And, my husband and I got married very young, right out of college, 21. We started a business. My husband's worked very hard, did the labor himself, and put up my first car as
Right. It's just these democratic talking points about things they don't like. They're racist, sexist. It's just how the ruling class speaks, the educated class. And this is Dan Bowles here from the Washington Post. This is a discussion that took place at the Harvard Kennedy School for Public Administration. And he starts invoking these democratic tropes.
That they were lukewarm about her. There was clearly sexism involved in that. And one of the rappers...
How does he know that there was sexism? How does he even know that there's such a thing as sexism? He doesn't. It's just part of his hero system that he's inherited, that if you have any different reactions to different groups, that's ipso facto a representation of bigotry and sexism and racism, as opposed to someone who prefers to live in reality. Right? So this is how they blind themselves to reality. They invoke all these terms against reality. So when you have a hero system that's constantly clashing with reality, then in the end, you are going to be ineffective and you are going to be humiliated, right? There are hero systems that are amenable to reality, and there are hero systems that are at war with reality. And Dan Bowles' hero system and the hero system of everyone on this panel at Harvard University after the election is just at war with reality by invoking these non-existent moral sins such as sexism and racism.
That night at a big gathering expressed it in quite stark terms. That, he said, I think women deal with issues with emotion, and I'm worried if she gets bullied, is she going to deal with this with strength and integrity or emotion? I mean, it was...
Well, do men and women deal with issues differently? Yes, I would say that men and women deal with issues differently. That doesn't mean that no woman can be president of the United States. But Kamala Harris was the worst candidate that any major party in the United States has put up in my lifetime.
I mean, the whole room of people were just shocked to hear this, but
people did not doubt that Margaret Thatcher could make decisive decisions. People doubted that Kamala Harris could make decisive decisions. So if you want to blind yourself to the reality of what a horrible candidate Kamala was, you invoke these tropes about sexism.
Express it in that way. And another thing that a couple of the organizers said to me was that they have watched, unlike the civil rights generation of African Americans, that the younger Black Americans have watched, the election of Barack Obama and the election of a lot of Black officials around the country. But when they were somewhat disengaged, their sense was, our lives haven't really gotten better. So do we trust the Democrats?
Your life is unlikely to get better if you're depending upon what some politician does. All right. The primary way that your life gets better is based on what you do. Right? What goes on in your house should be 1,000 times more important to you than what goes on in the White House. So anyone who's relying on the president of the United States to make their life better, that's usually a mistake.
Now, again, this was not a question of how many of them would go for Trump, although some obviously did, but how many would stay home? And that was the critical question. It was only when I went to Bucks County, where I interviewed primarily women, suburban women, where you found that passion about, Trump is loathsome, and Harris is, we have to be there for Harris. So out of that, I came away with the feeling that, the obvious, this was going to be a very, very close race down to the end. She had work to do. If she could close the sale, she could get there. But if she couldn't, then it was going to be Trump's to win.
She never made a convincing case for people who are undecided why they should choose her.
Yeah, no, there's so much there that I hope we are able to get to that echoes many of my experiences on the road that I'm sure.
What was your moment? What was like your...
Yeah, I think so. The election went the way I expected it to go, and I was talking to my students about this yesterday, and I had office hours with an awesome young woman from Michigan, and she's like, "Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you prepare us?" I said, "So you could be sad for 2 months." Like, I didn't want to bring things down. I wanted you all to be hopeful and excited and engaged, but I oversaw swing voter focus groups at Axios until this spring, and it was very clear to me. So this is before Harris became the nominee, but it was very clear to me that the main thing people were going to do was not swing from. And this group was with people who voted for Trump in 2016 and swung to Biden, and so
like the extent to which
this is another Washington Post
gender
reporter.
did play a role in a lot of those.
Kamala Harris didn't lose because of gender. Kamala Harris lost because she was such a pathetic candidate.
Guys that you talked about who were going to stay on the couch. I remember just having these conversations in Bucks County, actually, with women as well, who were very agitated about the abortion issue, but kept saying things like, I'm just not sure. They didn't know anything about her as vice president or her past experience.
Well, she's never accomplished anything impressive. She's gotten where she's gotten because of the adroit way she's played the diversity, equity, inclusion, affirmative action game.
And would say, I'm just not sure that she's strong enough. I'm just not sure how she'll.
She's never demonstrated the ability to make decisive decisions. So just because people can't quite articulate something doesn't mean that their intuition is wrong.
Deal with the pressures. And a lot of them, my colleague Ashley Parker and I ended up spending a couple of weeks talking to voters just about, just the basic question of like whether America's ready for a female president.
A majority of Americans voted for a female for president in 2016. But both Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris are unlikable people. They're both mediocre at best politicians. Right, this election had nothing to do with whether or not America was ready for a female president.
And, it was very, the answers were very mixed, and a lot of, no one wants to admit that, sure. But, they would.
Well, they don't want to admit it to people like you who are going to look down and judge them for it.
Voters would say, yes, of course, but not that woman. Or, I don't know that she has the experience to deal with these world issues. And then I'd ask about like J.D. Vance, who no one liked, by the way. Just average voters all had heard about the cat ladies thing. But and then they'd say, well, yeah, but I think, he's been in the Senate, and I think, and it's like, it was, they didn't know much about her biography.
J.D. Vance is simply far more impressive, and far more intelligent, and far more accomplished than Kamala Harris.
And then there was sort of these automatic questions that female candidates always get, which is, that a lot of times Americans just have them meet a higher bar. Like the research and science, as you all know, says that.
The research and the science says that men and women tend to have different gifts, and that people tend to perceive men and women differently. Right? Female candidates have many advantages, and they have other things that are more difficult.
And so it's been really fascinating to sort of sort through the results on that. And I found so much questioning of that too, particularly among younger Latinos, mm-hmm. and also Black men as well. But
obviously were Black men who express sexist worldviews, as there were Latino men and white men and white.
And what's a sexist worldview? That men and women have different gifts? Is it a sexist worldview that Kamala Harris was a terrible candidate? Was it a sexist worldview to point out the obvious, that she wasn't particularly intelligent? Was it a sexist worldview to point out that she got where she got because of affirmative action? Are these all sexist worldviews?
Women and Black women, like sexism is not unique to men or a group of men of a certain race, but it was very frustrating. It was very frustrating to hear people say, I'm sure you were in the same situation, I don't think she is smart enough, or I don't.
Why would that be frustrating? She's obviously not smart enough. Why is truth so frustrating for you, sir? What is it about truth that you find so incredibly disturbing?
I don't think she has the experience.
She does not have an impressive track record.
Think she's done anything, and then you tell.
What exactly has she accomplished?
Them, and they're like, I just still don't like.
What exactly do you tell them that shows that she's intelligent and accomplished? There's nothing that you can tell them.
Feel it, and you realize we're not dealing with facts at this point.
Why do you think you're not dealing with facts? I think you're the one who's not dealing with facts. Right? This smug condescension that the voters are just hidebound reactionaries, they're just misogynists and sexist and racist, and they don't know what's good for them. Ugh. It's disgusting.
Right? And she had to go up against that. I will say this, and hopefully we could talk about this a bit. We were talking backstage a bit about Bubbles, Gage, who knew very little about her. Yeah. And I don't think that's a reflection of what she was doing.
What exactly would she like people to know about her? She had nothing impressive to tell people.
I think that's a reflection of two things. I would love to hear you weigh in on this. How the media covers vice presidents.
Well, to the extent the news media covered Kamala Harris, they covered her as someone who was dysfunctional, an embarrassment to the Biden White House, who could not retain people working for her, that people would quit because she treated them so badly, that she wanted to blame staff for her own flaws.
Or doesn't cover vice presidents. And all
was Attorney General and then ran for Senate. And the perception of her in California among voters was so different than what the perception.
I don't think so. I doubt it.
Became of her as soon as she got into the role of vice president, where she had like taken in California, people saw her as like really tough and this.
Where on earth is she coming up with this, that the people of California saw Kamala Harris as really tough? She's just inventing this.
Like tough prosecutor. And then when she got into the White House, I mean, that role as vice president always inevitably is kind of invisible.
Right.
The reason that Kamala Harris got terrible press as vice president wasn't because she was invisible. It's because she repeatedly screwed up, didn't know what she was saying. She was highly unimpressive when she was interviewed by Lester Holt, that she was always unimpressive when called upon to say something that wasn't already scripted for her, and that she treated her staff terribly and people quit on her. Right? These are the obvious points, but none of them get raised.
But, she, in deference to Biden, I think really certainly took a back seat. But it took her a long time to kind of find her niche. And, I think that the Biden administration's decision to make her the face of part of the immigration issue, even though she was not border czar, as Trump always said, I think that was a really tough thing for her to deal with in this campaign. But also,
she's as good as this party has had, with the exception maybe of Barack Obama and Bill Clinton. But, as a candidate this fall, who said, as a political communicator, she's as good as this party has had.
How absurd is that? A political communicator, she's as good as the Democrats have ever had, with the exception of Barack Obama and Bill Clinton. That's absurd.
Had, with the exception maybe of Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, but it eclipsed everybody.
Right, they're grading her on a curve, right? They're grading her on an affirmative action curve. She was a terrible communicator, except for when she was reading words that other people had written for her. I mean, what a world of delusion these Washington, D.C. elites are in. I mean, she had all sorts of interviews, and she didn't do great in any of them. Right? She was just all over the place.
Answering in one interview that when she was asked why she hadn't been to the border, and she said, well, I haven't been to Europe. So it was like those tiny snippets that I think a lot of people were seeing on TikTok. And then I think that, speaking of a change in narrative, then like when the whole when everything like switched over this summer, it was like that massive transformation overnight where suddenly people were like, oh, this is not this is not how she speaks, and like this is, you know, and it was like a.
It was how she speaks, unless she's reading off some prepared script. You cannot convincingly argue that she was an astute political communicator. That's what they're trying to tell us. All right, they're trying to gaslight us. They're trying to lie to us, but they might even mean and believe what they're saying, which seems completely absurd.
Up into the huge scandal that it was made out to be. That's just one example.
It's a great example, because at the Democratic convention, Barack Obama made a more explicit joke about the same topic.
Yes.
And the press treated it like it was hilarious.
It's true.
Look, I'll be honest. I thought when Trump said it, it was pretty funny. I chuckled a little bit. So, you know, I'm not going to be a prude about it. So that's just one example that comes to mind. But my question is, at the same time, that doesn't mean you should give Trump a pass. That doesn't mean that we're not going to. He's probably going to do some outrageous things that need to be scrutinized. So my question for you, I'm going to put you in charge of the Peoria Gazette now, Mark. If you were in charge of the New York Times or a major publication, how do you cover the Trump administration in a way that's critical but also not hysterical? How do you strike that balance?
Yeah. So I have said many times, the only thing I know that's harder than running against Donald Trump as a candidate is covering him. He's very difficult to cover because he lies all the time. He does things that are outside the norms of how people behave. And there are a lot of Trump supporters who would admit that. Hogan might not admit that he lies all the time, although if he were being honest, he would. But Hogan would admit that he defies norms. He's rude to people sometimes. He's abrasive. And lots of people voted for Donald Trump who think January 6th was an outrage, not necessarily believing that he encouraged the people to go storm the Capitol, but sitting in the White House and doing nothing about it, even when he was told by members of his family and his staff to do something. A lot of people find that outrageous. So I believe that the press should think about covering him fairly by scrutinizing what he does and not making things up. So the vice president, a big part of her speech was about there are good people on both sides and there'll be a bloodbath if he wins. And saying those things as the centerpiece of indicting Donald Trump that are just lies, and never once holding her accountable, never once saying she's saying things that are untrue. So I'm for trying to treat everybody equally, not a different standard for Donald Trump, not an easier standard, but the same standard. Now that's hard to do, because not everything is an apple to apples. But I would, so here are the baseline things I would do if the New York Times hired me as a consultant and say, we've seen the light, we no longer want to be unfair. I would say, stop writing things about Donald Trump that are unfair or false, and stop quoting Democrats saying false things about him as if they're true. That's one thing I would do. Then I would say, focus on how what he does affects the real lives of real people. Okay? Don't focus on the parlor games of Washington, or he was rude to a senator, or he made a joke that some people didn't like. Focus on what he does that affects the real lives of real people.
Yeah.
Stop assuming that if someone says something about him, even on the record, stop saying, well, General Kelly must be telling the truth and Donald Trump must be lying. That's not the way it normally goes. They let anyone make an accusation about him and they build their news coverage around it. Stop doing that, and then start over with editors and reporters and say, are you indifferent to the success of Donald Trump as a candidate or as a president? Are you for the public interest, or do you have an ideological rooting interest to stop Donald Trump's agenda? And if their answer is they have an ideological rooting interest, tell them to go work someplace else. Fill the newsroom with people who want to hold powerful interests, including Donald Trump, accountable to the public interest, and take out all the liberals, because they will always revert back to being liberal and to being against Donald Trump. If you asked the reporters for the 10 major news organizations in the U.S. covering the election, and they were honest, who do you want to win, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? Hogan, what do you think, 99-1?
Probably.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. To have people have a rooting interest against one of the candidates, doesn't make sense. The last thing I would do is I would hire. I wouldn't let political reporters write the policy stories, because most political reporters don't know anything about policy. So if Donald Trump makes a speech about health care, Have it covered by the healthcare reporter who understands healthcare and is not liberally biased, not a political reporter who doesn't know a thing about it. Those are the first things I do. Hogan, did I forget anything?
No, there are more things you could add, I'm sure. I think one of the things is frustrating, and I started in journalism, and I had a professor who was a socialist atheist, but if you put an editorialized word in the story, he would fail it immediately. There was no question about it. It wasn't like 5 points off. It was just done. So I was brought up in that journalism school of just straight reporting, even though I was clearly a Republican and biased. But I can't tell you the amount of times when I was in the White House, a reporter would come in and say, hey, I have someone at the Pentagon who's telling me Donald Trump said X in a meeting. And I was like, okay, is it on the record? No, they'll only go on background. I was like, okay, well, I was in the meeting. I can go on the record and tell you exactly what happened, and that didn't happen. And they would go, I'm confident in my reporting. And I'm like, to the person who's not going to go on the record? Yeah, I believe them. And I'm like, but I was in the meeting. I can tell you every player, like, and whatever. And they're just like, no, too bad. There was the stat that came out when he was president. It was 93% negative news coverage. In this election, it was 89% negative news coverage on him and 83% positive coverage on Kamala. It's so frustrating to watch writ large just a mass of media kind of coalesce or carry the water for, cover up for a particular side. Because again, to carry forth my example, when the Afghanistan pullout happened, and that was the moment that changed the trajectory of the Biden campaign. His popularity started dipping and going down on that one thing. Well, all the reporters that I dealt with in the White House who called me with informants inside the Pentagon about a various story, you're telling me not one of them could be bothered to call over there and say, did anybody tell Joe Biden this was going to happen? It would be very easy for them to do that. It's because they didn't want to know the answer, or they believed they wanted to prop Joe Biden up, because further reporting showed all of his generals said, don't do it this way. You're going to leave equipment behind. It's going to lead to death, et cetera. And so, it's kind of our side saying, why is no one fired? Well, because they told them what to do, but no one reported on it at the time. I know it's convoluted. I'm just saying it's so frustrating because I deal with them every day. And to watch them go apoplectic, as you just said, talking about Arnold Palmer's penis at a rally, mischaracterizing it and going, ballistic when Barack Obama made a joke way more obvious and offensive just weeks prior, just kind of shows the pearl clutching and the ridiculous nature of a lot of things they try to do to us.
Yeah, let me say two more things about your question, and then I'm going to bring Drew in. I'm bringing a lot of Harris supporters in tonight because we want everyone to view this platform as open to them, and we've had, but not everybody's heard me make it, so I'll make it again. The same reporters, editors, correspondents who spent 3 years covering up Joe Biden's loss of mental acuity in conspiracy with the White House are the same people who are covering the Trump administration. Same people. And how can the Trump administration and people who support the Trump administration think that those people who not only engaged in a conspiracy of cover-up for 3 years, but have never acknowledged their role in it, even after Joe Biden stepped down, how could any conservative, any Trump supporter say, well, that's right, those are the right people to tell the American people what's going on with Donald Trump? Number two, when I talked about the real lives of real people, everybody here is familiar with women whose families have told, and either told their own stories or told their family members' stories, who have been adversely affected by the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Those women and their families are profiled in the news all the time. Mm-hmm. Okay. President Trump in 2016 and 2024 highlighted the stories of families whose loved ones were victims of crime by people in the country illegally. And the media never talks about those people. They never profile them. They never interview them. They never feature them. They never write about them. And I can tell you, conservative media does. And they are emotionally resonant. And that's about the real lives of real people. So I would say, if an administration, a normal administration of a Democrat is pushing a certain policy, we need to deport people in the country illegally who've killed Americans, American citizens. If that were a Democratic administration, those families would be on the Today Show.
Yes.
They'd have long profiles in the New York Times. They would be iconic. And you will never once read about them. And Donald Trump a few days before the election at Mar-a-Lago, did an event and featured those families. And he also featured the families of a woman whose daughter-in-law died in Afghanistan. I know that happened because I watched it live on YouTube. Most people here don't know it happened because there was not a word written about it in the dominant media, not one word. And how you can justify that discrepancy. Talk about the real lives of real people. Kamala Harris never called those families. That matters to those families, and it matters to a lot of military families.
Wow. So Mark Halperin just made a string of great points, and he's pretty much in the political center. He does an extraordinary job covering American politics fairly. I've been following him since approximately 2000 when he was political director at ABC News. Mickey Kaus would frequently reference him and link to him. And that's how I got on the Mark Halperin bandwagon. So I've been watching a series on Amazon Prime called Game 7. It's a 6-part series featuring decisive Game 7 contests in baseball, in basketball, and in hockey. And in the third episode, they talk about Dirk Nowitzki and the Dallas Mavericks and how they were taking on in Game 7 their arch rival, the San Antonio Spurs. Of course, both teams are in Texas. And I think that this discussion here touches on the essence of in-group identity and nationalism, right? This is Michelle Beadle, who was doing play-by-play for the San Antonio Spurs 20 years ago.
Why would Dallas Mavericks fans hate the Spurs? Because the banners. That's
Right.
part of being a fan. It's an irrational hate for a group of people you don't even know.
Part of being a fan is an irrational hate for people you don't even know. Part of being a nationalist, part of having a strong in-group identity, all right, is having an irrational hatred for people you don't even know, because it's simply the flip side of your love for the people you do know. I just want to replay
Why would
this.
Dallas Mavericks fans hate the Spurs? Because the banners. That's part of being a fan. It's an irrational hate for a group of people you don't even know.
Part of being a fan, part of being a nationalist, part of having a strong in-group identity for your normal person, right? There may be some elites who are an exception. They're able to transcend this normal part of the human condition. But the normal human condition is once you develop a strong in-group identity, once you become a strong nationalist, once you become devoted to your religion, you will simultaneously develop an irrational hatred of people you don't even know because you see them in opposition to your group. Right? These are basic human drives, and they cannot be extirpated by education, right? All you can do is weaken in-group identity. If you weaken in-group identity, weaken nationalism, then you'll have less irrational hatred of people you don't even know. But as long as a person has strong in-group identity and strong nationalist leanings, right, they are highly likely to have an irrational hatred of people they don't even know. That's what it means to love one group of people, is to hate other people who threaten them. They go together. You can't have the love without the hate.
Smile, Flatter, and Barter. How the World is Prepping for Trump Part 2. This article is by Mark Lendler, Martina Steves-Gridniff, and Mark Santora, and read by an automated voice. When Prime Minister Keir Starmer met Donald J. Trump at Trump Tower for dinner on September 26, it was part of a British charm offensive to nurture a relationship between a left-wing leader and a right-wing potential president. So when Mr. Trump turned to Mr. Starmer before parting and told him, "We are friends," according to a person involved in the evening, it did not go unnoticed. Whether they stay friends is anybody's guess. For months leading up to Mr. Trump's political comeback, and in the heady days since his victory was confirmed, foreign leaders have rushed, once again, to ingratiate themselves with him. Their emissaries have cultivated people in Mr. Trump's orbit or with think tanks expected to be influential in setting policies for a second Trump administration. Some leaders, like President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, are drafting their pitches to appeal to Mr. Trump's transactional nature. Others, like Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada, have deployed teams of officials to the United States to visit dozens of Republican leaders in the hope that they can moderate Mr. Trump's most radical instincts on imposing tariffs.
So Donald Trump is for America first. And all sorts of nations want to go through all sorts of conniptions and try all sorts of things. But it just basically comes down to he's going to put the interests of America first as he sees those interests. And you're not going to be able to manipulate him out of doing that.
History suggests that many of these bridge-building efforts will fail. By the end of his first term, Mr. Trump had soured on several leaders with whom he started off on good terms. His protectionist trade policy and aversion to alliances, coupled with a mercurial personality, fueled clashes that overrode the rapport that the leaders had labored to cultivate. There were two misapprehensions about Trump, Malcolm Turnbull, a former Prime Minister of Australia, said in an interview. The first was he would be different in office than he was on the campaign trail. The second was the best way to deal with him was to suck up to him. In January 2017...
Right, so you can suck up to him and flatter him, but in the final analysis, it's not so easy to manipulate him or even to manipulate some mentally ill person on the street. It's very hard to manipulate other people, right, because we did not evolve to be gullible. Right, John Heilman is a lefty, regularly appears on MSNBC. Here he's talking with journalists at Puck, Dylan Byers and Peter Hamby. They're all a bunch of lefties. This is after Trump's election.
For president. Didn't matter. I think we started to see that during the course of the 2016 campaign. And then, lo and behold, we got 4 years of him as president, and we got an insurrection on January 6th. And the polls were what they were. So right. It feels like this, I forget what the phrase is.
I thought what happened on January 6th was terrible. I thought Donald Trump bore substantial responsibility for it. But it's not the only issue, right? To just look at the world through the lens of, oh, this is disqualifying. That's very appealing because then you don't have to consider everything else at stake. Right. When I think what's at stake for the well-being of the United States, for its safety and security, right, January 6th is a 2 on a scale of 1 to 10 for me. Immigration is a 10. Staying out of forever wars, that's a 10 in priority for me. A trade policy that is better aligned with the interests of Americans, that's an 8 for me.
Is idiocy or whatever is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. But how much more evidence do you need? Not that Trump isn't transgressive, not that he hasn't done things that are terrible. How much more evidence do you need that the public either doesn't care or has other issues that they care about more, and that they are willing to tolerate it?
Why wouldn't the public have other issues that they care about more? Right, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, I spend 60% more for groceries now than when Joe Biden took office, and I haven't changed my selection of food.
And willing to stomach it, and perhaps you could have made Democrats could blame the Electoral College, or they could blame the fragmentation of media, whatever. He's getting the popular vote now, and at a certain point, Democrats have to come around to understand that part of the problem is that
that Trump got the popular vote. That has taken so much wind out of the Democrats' sails. That's why the reaction to Trump's victory is so muted.
Their platform, their messaging, their entire, for lack of a better word, vibe is not. It isn't reaching a broad enough swath of the electorate. Right. Who has moved on and doesn't care and needs to be talked to differently by Democrats.
Well, Peter,
Democratic media, like MSNBC. No offense to John and Tim, our friend, but like, fire half the people on air who just tell people what they want to hear.
Right.
Like, tell viewers, tell Democrats, present them with evidence that doesn't comport with their college-educated blue bubble worldview. I'm sorry.
Right. Well, there's a lot of things to say about that, which we can get to a little later. We talk about the business imperatives versus the truth-telling imperatives. But
whoa, all right, the difference between the business imperatives to tell people what they want to hear versus the truth imperatives. He's admitting that Morning Joe, on which he's a regular, right? That TV show that purports to be a news show bases the business imperatives of telling people primarily what they want to hear rather than what is true. Right? And I have the same dilemma. If I wanted to be successful, if I wanted to optimize for success, I would come here and tell you what you want to hear. I would give you a reliably right-wing message that the elites are terrible, the media is terrible, that I'm fighting for you, right? People want predictability, right, when they tune into a podcast. And I don't optimize for success. I don't optimize for attention. I strive to optimize for truth. So I've made a business decision that I don't need to, that I will not optimize for success at the cost of truth. That's the business decision I've made. Morning Joe has made a different decision. Right? They optimize for business success by telling people what they want to hear. Successful talk radio, by and large, has optimized for success by telling people what they want to hear. Right? Fox News optimizes for success by telling people what they want to hear. Right? This is Decoding the Gurus, and we have Matt here, the co-host, who's been visiting the United States, particularly the West Coast.
They're like dwarves. The beards go down to their knees.
Oh.
Yeah, but they're cool.
I have a beard update. I've got a beard. More the mid-2000s filled in beard now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, now I look like a
No, we'll leave it there. We'll leave it there for the American wisdom. I know we should get to the supplementary materials.
Not allowed to rub your hands on these podcasts, Matt. Not allowed. Just tell you, even if you're cold, those noises, they travel. And,
at least there's no squeaky chair. There's no squeaky chair, but there is a bed.
That's true. So, but when there's no squeaky chair, you feel obliged to create new noises from your environment. You're like a noise machine. Yeah. But yeah, well, we look forward to it. I expect at least some, what is the word, like controversial insights. You need to tell us about the homeless people problems in the cities you visit, the law and order there, it's breaking down. Man, I've been hearing these George Soros guys, they were taking down the country. Somebody's getting paid. Okay, so you got to find out what's going on.
No, I have, I have found out that what the MAGA people are saying about the coastal elites is true, actually. I didn't want to mention it at first, but yeah, it's actually true. Like San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle, they were literally in flames. The cities were burning.
Oh, yeah. Just joined the Mad Max gang, the Liller beard maniacs. So it's hard to come up with a name off the top of your head. Okay, the Liller beard maniac gang, and the kind of the Let You podcast.
Yeah,
in between your duties.
Yeah, they were fine with it. They were fine with it. Yeah, no, America.
Trust me, there's a point coming up. I'll admit I didn't have this queued to the correct point, but there's a point coming up about American unbridled enthusiasm and emotional nakedness by contrast with more repressed Europeans and Australians.
America, yeah, that's not that interesting. I mean, America is interesting, don't get me wrong. The scenery is very nice. It's a bit like Australia, lovely scenery, shame about the people. But, no, the people are quite nice too. They're like Australians.
That's Australian humor, Matt. You flag that up.
No, Americans, especially people from San Francisco, like Australians, but just more flair. They got more joie de vivre.
In my last visit.
Yeah, that's a dramatic difference between Australians and Americans. Americans are more emotionally naked. They are more enthusiastic. They exhibit much more joie de vivre, joy in life. Right? They're much less restrained than Europeans.
Visits to America, I felt reverse culture shock. Right? Well, it's not even reverse because I'm not American. Right? But just I felt like everybody. To be fair, I did go to California, right? But I felt like everything was turned up to 11. Like people around me were emoting like they were in a video game or something. It was like, ha, 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 ha. And then like other people on the street like, that's so sad. And I felt like it was, like the Truman Show, where it was like heightened reality. And yes, it probably was in part because of the contrast, coming from Japan, where a lot of these things are more subdued. But yeah, so I'm wondering, you don't get that? Maybe it's like if you go to California, you'll experience that too. But You don't get that? Like a kind of heightened sense of reality?
No, I think that's true. They're like Australians, but Australians are dialed down to 6 and they're turned up to 11. And, like, I think you would cut this particularly because, you come from a devastatingly emotionally crippled culture, Northern Ireland. Yeah, exactly. That's right. Just broken, shut down people. And
exactly.
So, Americans, they're living large, man. This is how they operate. And it seems like they're doing a bit. You got to this can't be for real. But they're not. They're actually genuinely like that.
No, they're actually having joy. Experiencing joy.
That's right. They have optimism and they have plans and they feel like they might accomplish things. Obviously, they're delusional. None of that's going to happen. But, I'm happy to see it. I do like it. It is like an uncanny valley type thing. And
a lot of Australians appreciate American enthusiasm. They will mock it, but at the same time, it is pleasant. It is uplifting. It is energizing.
I think Americans feel that with us too, right? Let's be honest. There's the uncanny valley thing. It's like you're kind of normal, like a normal human like us, but not quite. And it's those little differences that really, intrigue us symmetrically.
Well, Irish people, Matt, we're popular wherever we go, sadly. The world loves us. He did a Q.
Right. This is Andrew Gold here talking about the algorithm on YouTube and how it limits the type of videos that he makes. He's talking about audience capture.
And he was, there's a lot of clips I could take from Andrew Gold, but this is, I think, one of the least cruel ones to focus on. So he's talking about the dynamics on YouTube, the kind of algorithm and this kind of thing. And I think he did a pretty good job of illustrating what is motivating people when they're focusing on YouTube, right? And feeding the monster. And this is in response to somebody asking him about would he like to cover other topics other than the stuff that he focuses on, which is primarily all the anti-woke at the minute. And I thought this was interesting. So listen to this.
What new topics would you like to touch on in the future? And I think there are many that I don't. And I think there are questions later that I'll sort of labor this point. But when you make a channel like this, you are somewhat limited. And I think a lot of idealistic people are somewhat offended by this or let down by this when I talk about it, because they want to believe that here I am as some creative pioneer of the internet, just making what I want to make and what floats my boat. And to a large extent, that is true. However, it is just a fact of how YouTube works that if you release a video that is not popular as a topic among your subscribers, that video will die. It will be a waste of a lot of money that you've put into it, let alone a lot of time. Now you can argue, hang on, it's not a waste of time. You got it out there and 20 people still saw it. Okay, I get that, but I could just tweet about it as well rather than make an hour-long huge video just for a few people to watch. The second issue is, once you do that, all the people who didn't click on it are less likely to be shown the thumbnail, the video link, for my next video. And that won't do as well. So then it's basically a downhill slope from there. You are under constant stress as a YouTuber, constantly stressed. And every video has to do incredibly well. And if one video comes out that doesn't do as well as the rest, it will influence the rest of them. Equally, if you have a couple of really big ones, as I had this month with Richie Herron, which is over 1 million, and Dr. Hilton, which is approaching 1 million fast, it lifts the rest of the channel and you start to grow at a much, much faster rate. And it is very much like gambling. It's very much, you wake up in the morning after a video's come out and the first thing is you look at your phone. This is an addiction. And the people who get to the point where they're actually able to make a living from it, we're addicted. We are addicts with regards to YouTube. And you cannot get to this position without being so. I know some people get, a bit older and more successful and they hire huge teams to take care of this kind of thing. But unless you are a Stephen Bartlett or something like that, you're basically a one-man show and you are addicted.
Well, Chris,
So you choose to put yourself in that position where you decide your self-worth on the basis of how many subscribers you have, on the basis of how many people view your content, on the basis of how much money you make. If you depend on YouTube for paying the rent, then you're going to be obsessed with the algorithm. On the other hand, you can decide to simply prioritize something else, such as telling the truth or doing good, exploring ideas that are more likely to have a pro-social effect, right? And you can do other work. It may not be as exciting. It may contain a considerable element of menial. But that way you can then be, strikes me, much more honorable in optimizing for truth rather than simply optimizing for the algorithm. So choose which way you want to go, man.
I found that quite refreshing, really. I mean, you're quite aware and self-aware about the incentives at play and how the YouTube algorithm works. And a little bit like Konstantin Kisin, he's, shows his hand quite readily. I mean, he's a creature of the algorithm, and he feels compelled to make clickbait, essentially. But, if you want to have a successful YouTube channel, you're kind of compelled to do that. I mean, there's a fair bit of truth in that, isn't there?
I mean, yes and no, but I feel I see a bunch of creators who choose a different path. Take CoffeeZilla, for example, right? He's tried a whole bunch of different things, but when we were talking to him, he was saying, initially he was thinking he has to feed this algorithm with consistent content, but then he found out that his audience actually responded to longer form investigations, even if they took time, and that.
So the blokes behind Decoding the Gurus chose a different path, and they've become enormously influential. And they are not deciding what they have to say and who they're going to interview and what episodes they're going to release based on an algorithm. They're not optimizing for income or for success or for attention. They're optimizing for what they believe to be true and good. That strikes me as a much more honorable approach.
People were willing to support that, and he didn't need to do these kind of daily news breakdowns.
Yeah, they he didn't need to do the grinding and the optimizing.
Yeah, and what Andrew Gold is describing is audience capture, but leaning into it, because what he talks about is the success is Stephen Bartlett, right? Diary of a CEO.
Yeah.
That's the people that have made it and are doing it, right? And from my perspective, those are the people that are making a lot of money, but are producing a lot of draws, right? They don't care if the person they have on is a Brett Weinstein talking nonsense for 3 hours, as long as it gets enough downloads, or Lex with Kanye West, these kind of things. So his role models are just people that make a lot of money.
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, this is the Konstantin Kisin understanding of what it means to be successful.
Right. I am not interested in the thoughts of people who optimize for the algorithm. That means Joe Rogan, Konstantin Kisin, Ben Shapiro, and the like, because they don't prioritize truth. I'm not particularly interested in the thoughts of Richard Spencer or Nick Fuentes. They optimize for attention.
Right, which is they do equate metrics with success, not totally unreasonably, right? Because it is obviously the ticket to everything they want, which is monetary benefits and a higher profile and all of that stuff. Influence. Yeah. But like you said, it's not compulsory. You don't have to do that. You can simply be good, like CoffeeZilla. You can simply have something unique to offer and to continue to deliver that. And
that's what I try to do. All right. I try to come to this show with my best, all right, with the sources of information that I regard as the best out of all the sources that I've consumed. And then I come with my values, with my particular hero system, what I understand as right and wrong. And I try to make a contribution. And sometimes, like today, I don't have any specific point. I've just got a bunch of clips lined up, and I'm hoping that inspiration will strike me so that I can make some contribution beyond just playing other people's content.
With the hope that people will appreciate it. Or you could be like a Konstantin Kisin or an Andrew Gold. There are different paths, Chris, to success.
I know. So it was mainly in part, they're describing the YouTuber dynamics, which I've heard elsewhere. But what he's describing now is basic that you must feed the algorithm in order to grow, and growth is the goal. It's a bit like a Mr. Beast mindset, but I usually hear YouTubers talking about how that is a poison, right? That is a mindset that leads to the dark side, right? Producing pandering content and whatnot. And his view that if he made something that was worthy, but like not many people saw it, or it damaged, his ability to get future downloads, like that's the metric, right? It doesn't matter if what he produced was actually more accurate than the thing that got like more downloads. So yeah, I just thought it was revealing of that mindset. And there was much more revealing stuff in that Q&A, but I'm not going to...
Chris, honestly, I think it is revealing. I mean, like more and more, like genuinely, what do you think about this? Because I feel like more and more that the incentives at play is actually a bigger and bigger part in terms of understanding why people are like this. When you look at most of the gurus, they are all really focused on their metrics. Yeah, it's true of Brett Weinstein just as much as it is of Andrew Gold, right? Like they notice immediately when their engagement levels drop. Yeah, or Jordan Peterson, when their engagement levels drop by 15%. Like they are, like Andrew says, addicted. And whether it's attention or the immediate financial benefits of getting more, subscribers and advertising revenue or whatever, I mean, that is what is driving them to be what they are. And I think this explains a lot of what is contributing to an unhealthy discourse in America and other places of the world, where just things get, like everything gets more and more clickbaity, more and more extreme, more and more negative emotions and an outrage, or conspiracy theories and delusional fantasies instead of content. It's just like, it's like junk food for the brain. But that is what sells, I guess.
Well, so speaking of conspiracy theories and junk food for the brain, Justin Trudeau
Okay, I want to play an interaction that I had with Kip back 4 months ago. So let's go to the videotape.
Himself leads himself, which is the part dwelling within the body, within the emotions, behind the mind, how to reach it, how to challenge it to emerge from the benefit of each person, bring it forward, how to reach the opening of the inner light so that something superior to mind can become the ruler of mind.
So the mind is part of the body, all right? Whatever's going on with the body is going to affect what's going on in the mind. Now, there are advantages to achieving the type of mystical bliss that Kip is advocating for here, but you'll likely end up, as a result, less connected to other people. All right, you will have perhaps this individual experience of bliss, but it will come at the price of your effectiveness in the real world and at the cost of your relationships with other people.
Use the mind, body, and emotions as an instrument for a sacred purpose. Various doctrines and teachings were developed to bring forth an individual's higher nature. The Neoplatonists, Buddhists, Hermetics, and many others worked on this problem.
So I am skeptical and suspicious of the benefits of what Kip is advocating here, because using yourself for this sacred purpose through mysticism, it's going to come at the cost of your relationships with other people. And so we primarily, in the real world, we primarily morally affected by the people around us, by the people who are important to us, right? Not by mystical doctrines. And so by removing yourself from other people, limiting your interactions with them to go into this mystical bliss, I don't believe that will generally lead to a moral improvement.
The light in the inner must shine on the inner. The individual was not holding up a candle. It's something else. The light comes from above. The mystic who has found this light are unable to show others a specific way to find the light, only to explain how they themselves were able to develop. What do you say about that mouthful I've just given you?
Well, it exists in a world that isn't falsifiable. And so I'm sure this is a superior strategy for some people. I think some people are naturally equipped for an individualist mystical life, and many people are not. What I'm curious about is, in practical terms, how have you become a superior human being through embracing this mystical journey?
I mean, I'm not superior, man. That's why you'll never hear me use the word like enlightened. Somebody sounds like a prick that uses that word. Do you get what I'm saying?
No, superior to what you were before, not superior vis-a-vis other people, but superior to who you were prior to this experience.
Oh, I mean, I have unity with the universe now. I have.
So it's a lot easier to feel unified with the universe if you are increasingly removed from other people, right? It's easier to feel unity with God if you are increasingly removed from other people. On the other hand, if you are closely interrelated with other people, then you're much less likely to achieve this kind of mystical unity.
I have that connection, man. I can feel that transcendence. Nobody can pull the okie doke with me on lots of things like desires and things like that. I can see right through them. I'm telling you, it's just something.
And Kip may be overestimating his ability here to see through desires, because desires are incredibly deceptive. Right, the ego can sneak up on us without us being aware. The great thing about being so closely connected with other people is that they will call you on stuff when you are disconnecting from reality. They'll call you out when you're behaving badly. Right, other people are much more likely to see you accurately than you are.
Something you'll have to experience for yourself. If you.
Well, I was bedridden for 6 years, and I did have, during that time, some of this mystical bliss and unity with God, because I didn't have much else going for me at the time.
I'm just telling you that.
And then when my life became much more connected with other people, right, there was some moral shortcomings. I became sexually promiscuous, for one. I became reverted to my attention-seeking self. All right, more of my flaws were revealed when I was interacting with other people, as opposed to when I was just interacting with my vision of the divine. On the other hand, I found a way out of my chronic illness. I got help. I got a medication. I got a psychiatrist. I got concrete connections, relationships, people, synagogue, community. And overall, my life improved, even though it was messy, even though it was shot-filled with moral shortcomings. My life improved from when I was just having this mystical bliss of unity with God, and instead put more focus on connecting with other people.
There isn't. It seems like there's 1,000 different religions. There's no 1,000 different religions. There's only this one religion.
And that's just not factually true, right? There are dozens of different religions. It's not like what Kip is outlining here is just the one true religion and all other religions are false.
And then there's, like I tell you, it's twofold. There's this other thing, this cultural thing that you're talking about. And that thing has probably served the Jews well or whatever, but it doesn't turn out many holy people, if you think about it.
Well, how many Orthodox Jews do you know, Kip? Right? People often cast, vast judgments on Jews or on Muslims or on blacks or on homosexuals or this group or that group without knowing many.
If you judge something by the fruits of their labor, or by the fruit that it bears. But
well, Judge Israel probably takes better care of its citizens than any other nation state of which I'm aware. All right, Jews do tend to sacrifice for each other and help each other out. And in the Jewish state, all right, the Jewish state is run for the well-being of its citizens. And there is a tremendous amount of generosity extended largely to members of your fellow in-group, to fellow Jews?
I wanted to make up a little, I know it's Sunday and I shouldn't come at you, but earlier this week, actually day before yesterday, I was feeling I felt like the dark spirit come across me, and I had some bad thoughts about Israel, and I said, hey, I should collect these up. I'm sure Luke would give me a damn mouthful over these. So can I spill them out?
Right. Israel benefits from accurate criticism just as much as the United States or Jews do in general, or Christians or Muslim, right? We all benefit from seeing how other people see us, and from getting feedback, and from getting criticism, and then we have to exercise our own judgment about what's accurate criticism, what's not accurate criticism.
Okay, sure. This is what you live for. Is Israel a parasitic, psychopathic nation?
Okay, is Israel a parasitic, psychopathic nation? So I wish that the United States did not give aid to Israel. I would prefer Israel to just stand on its own 2 feet and to pay for everything. But the amount of aid that the United States gives Israel is only a very tiny portion of the Israeli economy. So I don't think that you can say that Israel is parasitic. It's far more productive than any other nation state around it, right? What other nation state around Israel is making as many innovations technologically, scientifically, in medicine, in culture compared to Israel, right? No surrounding nation comes close. So no, Israel does not live in Section 8 housing because Israel overwhelmingly established itself and has overwhelmingly paid its own way and secured its own borders.
Israel lives in Section 8 housing in Palestine and survives on welfare checks and military aid from America.
It doesn't survive. If Israel went without those $4 billion of American aid, Israel would still survive. Israel would be just fine. In fact, I think Israel would be far better off.
They've been a blight on the neighborhood since day one.
Okay, so if Israel's been a blight, who are the shining lights in the neighborhood? Would you say it's Egypt? Would you say it's Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq? I mean, where are the shining lights of civilization, freedom, progress, prosperity? Who's innovating? Who's coming up with breakthroughs? Who is making the world a better place through scientific, medical, technological, entrepreneurial breakthroughs? Who's publishing valuable books? Who's doing important research? I don't know on what scale, on what standard you would say that Israel is way behind its neighbors.
Have done little to ingratiate themselves to the neighbors.
Well, when the neighbors repeatedly try to wipe you out, what kind of sick party would then be intent on ingratiating themselves with those who are trying to wipe them out? Now, Egypt has stopped trying to wipe out Israel, but overall, the Egyptian people absolutely hate Israel, right? The Egyptian government has met the terms of the agreement that are reached with Israel and the United States, but it's not doing anything to have better relations with Israel. It just does the bare minimum to continue to get American subsidies.
In the region, Israel epitomizes the loser, the scum.
Okay, so on what basis is Israel the loser in the Middle East? It has the strongest military in the Middle East, has the most innovative economy, it creates the most breakthroughs, it publishes the most innovative research. I mean, on what scale is Israel a loser compared to Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan? Right? How exactly are the surrounding Arab states just winners and Israel's a loser?
Scumbag who claims all of his ex-girlfriends, all of his neighbors are shitheads, not him. They claim it's
So if you think the view that the nations surrounding Israel are a bad neighborhood, all right, you'd have to argue on what basis do you say they're a bad neighborhood? And the nation states surrounding Israel are incredibly backward, right? They don't give much to the world, right? They don't produce anything. They don't make many breakthroughs, right? they're incredibly primitive and savage nations. So, yeah, I think it's fair to say, on the basis of my hero system and on the basis of a European hero system, that Israel lives in a bad neighborhood. It is surrounded by savage, primitive, low-achieving nations.
It's a bad neighborhood with bad neighbors. But you're the dumbass newcomer who chose to live in the neighborhood. They didn't change the neighborhood out when you showed up. The neighbors were already there. Israel was offered Section 8 housing elsewhere too. Then to add insult to injury.
So Israel chose, the people Israel chose to return to their historical homeland. And it's a historical homeland that is in a bad neighborhood. So you could give up on your historical ties to a country, but I don't see why Israel should be blamed for not giving up on its historical ties to a particular land.
Those scumbags chose to practice apartheid and treat Palestinians as the other. Here's a novel idea.
Okay, so which nation states treat non-citizens exactly the same as citizens? Answer, none. None. So why would Israel have to be the exception? Nowhere in the world does any nation state treat non-citizens the same as citizens. Right? Palestinians, by definition, by the generally accepted understanding of the term Palestinian, are not citizens of Israel. Why would Israel extend them the same rights as they give their citizens?
Zionists should build friendships in the neighborhood the way.
Why would you want to build friendships with people who have no interest in building friendships with you? Why would you keep wanting to try to build friendships with people who keep trying to slaughter you and wipe you out?
They did with the Nazis back in the 30s. It's an American, as an American.
So it was the Jews who went to war with the Nazis back in the 1930s rather than the other way around. I think that's a novel interpretation, right? Jews in Germany prior to the Nazis were incredibly high achieving. And then Nazis arose as a movement and said Jews are essentially to blame for all of our problems. And that didn't work out too well for Germany.
Israel is a friggin' liability. They expect.
Okay, so when he argues that Israel is a freaking liability for an American, that's a strong point, right? Because by its support for Israel, the United States has alienated much of the Arab and Islamic world. That makes America's life much more difficult. Osama bin Laden listed American support for Israel as one of the 3 reasons that he attacked the United States on 9/11. So Israel is a liability for the United States, and it is simultaneously a positive thing for the United States. Now, is Israel such a blessing for the United States that it outweighs the harm that comes from Arab Islamic hatred for America due to its support of Israel? Right? That's a very challenging question. But it's one that should be allowed to be spoken about openly. Right? Is it in America's best interest to have such a close relationship with Israel? Right? We should be, as Americans, America first.
The neighborhood to improve, but refuse to improve their thinking. No amount of bloodshed will ever satiate this synagogue of insanity and unholy hate. Now
Okay, so that is how many Americans feel. Many, meaning, I don't know, 5% of Americans probably feel that way. And it's worthy of, airing those complaints about Israel and rebutting them and having that kind of open discussion about, is America's policy with regard to Israel in America's best interests? So Sam Harris's first book is called The End of Faith. And the podcast, If Books Could Kill, have chosen to focus on this.
Ideas, like we would any other belief, right?
Right.
Atran doesn't totally disagree that religious beliefs serve to make sense of things that we don't understand, but he also argues that religious belief is functionally an evolutionary byproduct that strengthens social cohesion. People participate in religious acts and rituals together which develops trust and community and establishes social bonds. The outlandishness of much of the religious doctrines and rituals actually serves to accentuate those bonds. So what Atran and other anthropologists are pointing at is that the reason that religious belief isn't as susceptible to rational analysis as scientific beliefs is that they aren't really serving the same purpose. Right. And part of why this is important is that it's necessary to understanding when and why religion produces violence, which is a huge focus for Harris. Yeah. Harris claims that it's the doctrines themselves, right? The holy books are violent.
So a question in the chat, have I covered what happened in Amsterdam? If not, why not? So in Amsterdam, after a soccer match between an Israeli team and a Dutch team, a bunch of Israelis got beaten up. And I haven't covered it because, to the best of my knowledge, no one was killed. Second reason, I haven't covered it because it doesn't capture my attention with such intensity that I've devoted a good deal of time finding out about it. So if 20 Israelis were murdered, right, I would have paid far more attention than just 20 Israelis or 30 Israelis get beaten up. So I don't have anything to add. It appears that the police response was weak. It appears that the offenders are largely getting away with it. It appears that some of the Israelis played a role in their own misfortune by destroying a Palestinian flag. So usually when something like this happens, right, one group has played a role in its own misfortune.
Endorse violence, and therefore people read them and commit violence. But Atran says not really. What's happening is that violence and the willingness to do violence serves as a source of community and interpersonal bonding that feeds into itself and develops into extremism. Sure. I wanted to bring this up because this is emblematic of a big picture critique of Harris's work. There's this vast literature about the function of religion, psychologically, sociologically, and he just does not engage with it at all. Right, of course. There's a really interesting conversation to be had here about why religion develops, how it builds community, how it can create conflict. But Harris is not interested in it because it would undermine his thesis. Maybe if he started to engage with it, he would realize that he's out of his depth and can't actually talk about these things with any authority.
I will say another thing that has become a huge red flag for me, and I think the new atheism thing was the first time I noticed it, was people like Sam Harris who think that they can sort of rational mind or like IQ their way into correct beliefs without engaging with the actual evidence.
If you're good enough at logic, you don't need to know things. You can just figure it out. Exactly. That is the core principle by which Sam Harris lives, even if he doesn't recognize it. It's also the core principle by which the Slate Star Codex guy lives.
I've always said that one of my major assets is that, like, I'm not that smart and I'm not that good at debating, but, like, I'm willing to read stuff. And most of the, like, opinions that I come to are like, well, I read up on this and one person is lying about this debate and one person isn't. But, like, it doesn't take a lot of, like, quote unquote intelligence to do that.
That's interesting. I always thought you could benefit from being more smart.
Thank you. You have said that to me in private numerous times.
Got him, folks. Got him. I am going to send you the opening paragraph of this book, edited for brevity. By me.
It says, the young man boards the bus as it leaves the terminal. He wears an overcoat. Beneath his overcoat, he is wearing a bomb. The bus is crowded and headed for the heart of the city. The young man smiles. With the press of a button, he destroys himself, the couple at his side, and 20 others on the bus. The young man's parents soon learn of his fate. Although saddened to have lost a son, they feel tremendous pride at his accomplishment. They know that he has gone to heaven and prepared the way for them to follow. He has also sent his victims to hell for eternity. It is a double victory. The neighbors find the event a great cause for celebration and honor the young man's parents by giving them gifts of food and money. This is all we know for certain about the young man. Why is it so easy then? So trivially easy, you could almost bet your life on it easy to guess the young man's religion. This man is a Scientologist. He took a stress test before boarding the bus.
Interesting how I described in detail a scenario specifically designed to evoke a certain image, and then that image was evoked. You ever think about that?
They could go
Islam crushed with logic.
A young man boards the mentions of a tweet by a female journalist. He corrects her on a trivial factual point orthogonal to her argument. Do I even need to tell you that that man is a Sam Harris podcast listener?
There's something very funny about just being like, as a justification for racism, being like, a man commits a crime. He has a tattoo with Spanish words. He says essay out loud. Interesting how I know his race immediately.
Wow. A man hosts a podcast and is obsessed with Eric Adams. That's right.
Okay, that's from If Books Could Kill, a couple of lefties, but they're funny, often pretty smart in their critiques. There they were taking on Sam Harris. All right, Commentary Magazine, the morning after Trump's victory.
That one question here, right, is that Republicans have long been victims of their own success on crime, right? That was the feeling that once crime actually dropped, people stopped worrying as much about it, and therefore
crime and foreign policy, right?
Right.
So we won the Cold War. Reagan won the Cold War, and then the the primacy of foreign policy as a political issue was removed from Republicans who had benefited from it for 2 decades.
Right. So we have that question about
decades. Yeah.
We have that question about abortion this time, which is that the Democratic swing back was so strong, getting the abortion on the ballot in state constitutions and things like that on ballot measures in red states. Did Democrats peak too early on their capitalizing?
And again, I think it's because the shift, and Kamala is the perfect representative of this in a way that Joe Biden was not, the shift to a very elite, technocratic, top-down, federal government above all party, that they took for granted a lot of their own typical voters in their own, traditional.
And also it's just silly identity politics.
Yeah,
silly
we should get to the identity politics stuff in its own time. Go ahead.
Just one more point on this, the abortion question. I think also what happened is that the Harris campaign failed to scare people into believing that we were now living in the Handmaid's Tale.
Dumbfounding political moment of the campaign, now that everything is over, they started proffering these insane and actually quite repulsive arguments about female voting in the United States in 2024. No, it's okay. You can go into the polling. It's a secret ballot. You don't have to tell your Trumpy husband that you voted for Kamala. I know you don't want. Maybe you're going to vote for Trump because.
You
and
can
what was
sleep
the
with
what was
enemy,
the
but don't
implicit?
vote for him, right?
But what was the implicit argument
some,
there?
I think some Trumpy husbands were keeping their vote secret from their wives.
Trump won it by 2 points last night. If you look at the way that MSNBC hosts were discussing the shift in the Hispanic and the Black vote for Trump, they basically said, oh, well, it's disinformation, it's misinformation, calling these voters too stupid to know what they were choosing. And that has been a consistent theme, both with regard to gender, with regard to identity politics, with regard to race, and really with regard to the economy and non-college educated American voters consistently for the past 4 years. And I think this is the response. This is the response that deserves, that condescension.
So this is a sequel to the beloved Democratic argument of the late 90s, early 2000s, as enshrined in the book, What's the Matter with Kansas by Thomas Frank, which is that Republican voters, particularly rural voters or, vote against their economic interest because they are brainwashed by social issues that don't matter. They don't matter, and what they need is they need unions to protect them. They need minimum wage laws to up their income. They need redistributive social economic policies to make sure that things are more equitable in the United States. And they don't vote that way. And they don't vote that way because they are hypnotized by demonic ideas to convince them that the social fabric that they live in is tearing and that they need to sew that up and not take care of themselves economically. And the condescension there that people don't know how to vote in their own interest is itself the most astoundingly anti-democratic idea that exists. People vote their own interest by definition. So if they vote in a way you don't like, and then you say, well, you know, they're really being stupid because they're not voting in their own interest, you're doing this backwards. What you need to do is figure out why people voted the way they voted and what they think their interest is. And then as a political party that wants to win elections, you try to figure out how to appeal to them or construct policies that will advance these ideas that you like, but will either make them either more palatable or will connect to the essential social fabric. Like, I'll give you an example of this. That is something that's going to be happening over the next 10 years. We're having this debate over childcare and, you know, family leave and all of that and family structure and that kind of thing. So, okay, Republicans are all for the family, but they don't want government imposing restrictions on private industry to force these things to happen. Or they haven't until now. And that's kind of like an interesting moment in time, because all Democrats want to do is say, big business, you do this, or businesses, you do this. We're going to impose these mandates on you, make sure that your workforce does this and that and the other thing and all that. Well, okay, so guess what? That doesn't work. I mean, it works. Businesses will make these changes, but people also want a growing economy. They want economic growth. They want to improve their position, their situation, and they're not dumb. So they know that if government is interfering in business, it adds layers of regulation. It makes life more difficult. It makes the possibility of them getting raises less likely because they're fulfilling more mandates. They're way more sophisticated about these things than Democrats and liberals give them credit for.
So yeah, I want to make a point about this, especially in light of the Jewish turnout last night for Trump. Jews get this lecture about voting against their interests all the time from liberal Jews, right? How could a Jew? I just don't understand how any Jew could vote for a right winger, a conservative, or this, that. And you're right in terms of the condescension. The feeling that inspires in me is a very special type of resentment.
Second term. Well, literally, it's his second term. However, because of the 4-year interval, because of the growth of the MAGA movement, because of the change in the coalition, and because of the efforts of people like Vice President-elect J.D. Vance to add policy meat to the bones of Trumpism, I would think of it more as Trump's first term. And in a way that's good for Trump, because second terms usually are terrible for presidents.
Right.
But I think because if this is the first time since the 19th century that we have a president winning non-consecutive terms, it's going to be a little bit different than other second terms we've had.
Imminent Iranian strike on Israel and the question of how the Biden administration is going to respond. And I have to say that I am nervous that unburdened by what has been by the results of the election, could Biden, particularly with the change in the Israeli government, that apparently the American administration is very upset that there's a cabinet change in another democratic country. It's not allowed, apparently, according to, they're going to get aggressive against Israel and blame Israel in some way, because of course you always blame the Jews. I don't know. But
well, like the Obama administration did on its way out.
Right, but but Obama was genuinely hated Bibi in a visceral way and showed that through his entire administration, and finally took this this crazy measure. Finally, as a Jew, may I just say, using the phrase as a Jew, that the fact that Doug Emhoff is now going to pass from my life, and I will never have to look at his face again or hear him talk as though he were the representative of my people, a man who does not have Jewish children and has told the world that he returned to his faith because of his wife's brisket, that he is no longer going to play a role in my.
So John Barter is just really good with social media and podcasting. Right. On election day, I played a little bit of Eli Lake, Trump and the Art of the Bullshitter. I want to play more here. If I can just get this going. He talks about the role of wrestling.
Trump is painting a picture with his words of a reality he would like us to see. He's not conveying the world as it really is.
Donald Trump really does, in a very pure way, demonstrate the difference between a lie and bullshit.
This is magician and professional exposer of bullshit, Penn Jillette, of the duo Penn and Teller.
A lie is very respectful of the truth, and that is denying it. And bullshit is saying anything that pops into your head. And that is very, very good in art and very, very bad in science and politics.
Now, if you want to understand why Donald Trump may be on the verge of winning the White House again, you have to reckon with our own country's relationship to the pungent brown stuff. It pervades everything from our economy to our culture. Bullshit is dangerous when it comes to science, but in politics, bullshit may be unsavory, but it is sadly essential.
There's a
or midget killer scoop, a death knell to the phony sport built on lies. But it wasn't. Wrestling fans didn't care it was fake. They were invested in the characters, the storylines, and the spectacle, not the authenticity.
I've never paid attention to wrestling, pro wrestling. It just does not appeal to me. But I read a book on Vince McMahon and purposefully set myself the task of understanding a little bit more about wrestling. I'm watching the Netflix documentary on Vince McMahon of WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment, because so much of what Donald Trump does is wrestling. It needs to be understood in the world of professional wrestling. I remember when I was a blogger and I was going up against a competing blogger, Gene Ross, covering the pornography world. And Gene Ross loved wrestling. And so you could not understand Gene Ross, my competitor, without understanding wrestling. And so much of what he would do and the way he would speak and carry himself and the rhetoric he would use and the scenarios that he would set up came out of the WWE and the like. And it was just a little bit mystifying for me at first because I just knew nothing about wrestling. But sometimes you have to put a little effort in and understand that the whole world doesn't have your reactions to wrestling or to anything.
When I look out there and I see Donald Trump, I think about how his business was compromised. But what happened last week when they took a shot at my hero? And they tried to kill the next president of the United States. Enough was enough. And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother. Let Trumpomania rule again. Let Trumpomania make America great again.
That was Terry Bollea, better known as Hulk Hogan, probably wrestling's most iconic champion. He was what wrestling fans would know as the face, a good guy who would fight staged contests against the heels or the bad guys.
Hulkamania is going to live forever. And if Andre the Giant physically destroyed me, physically wiped me out, physically took the belt, maybe the little Hulksters wouldn't believe that you got to play it straight, that you got to keep your head high, man.
He was given a primetime slot on the closing and most important night of the Republican convention.
And how about the Hulkster? How good was he? Is he up?
And the crowd lapped it up.
Where is he? Boy, oh boy. You know, they may call that entertainment. I know about entertainment, but when he used to lift a 350-pound man over his shoulders and then bench press him 2 rows into the audience, I say maybe entertainment, but he is one strong son of a gun. I will tell you, I watched it many times. There aren't a lot of entertainers that can do that, right?
Game recognized game.
You were fantastic. Thank you very much.
From one bullshitter to another, Trump gets it.
I didn't get into wrestling at all until I followed Trump.
This is journalist and author Matt Taibbi.
I had never paid any attention to it. And it wasn't until a couple of months into the race that
Right. Not a lot of people with college degrees are into wrestling. It appeals to a different demographic.
Somebody I knew had a friend who was in wrestling was telling me all about how Trump was playing the heel routine, right? Like if you understand...
Right. If you understand wrestling, you understand Donald Trump better.
The basic framework of wrestling is the heel versus the face. So the heel's job is to get everybody upset. That's what brings in the gate. The heel says horrible, vile things.
Triple H, did you just tell The Rock, don't do anything stupid?
That's what he said.
This coming from a man who took a sacred vow of marriage to the biggest slut in the Western Hemisphere?
It didn't happen. And she would not have been the chosen one. She would not have been the chosen one.
Now, this tradition of stretching the truth is a big part of our national politics.
Okay, and they also apply this analysis to Russiagate. Here's more from Eli
Obama
Lake.
of being born in Kenya, as other less skilled demagogues would. He doesn't make the mistake of a Senator Joe McCarthy, who claimed to have an actual list of names of communist spies in the army, which he of course made up and was exposed for making up. No, Trump was just asking questions and expressing doubt, and the controversy he stoked repositioned Trump as a central character in American politics in the 2010s. Obama had released a short-form birth certificate showing...
Right, my reaction to Donald Trump's birther allegations against Barack Obama was that they were insane, that this was reprehensible, but they worked for Trump. Right? If telling lies helps you to be more effective, and you are competing in a realm where telling lies is the coin of that realm, then you're probably allowed to do things, all right, that would be completely unacceptable in a different realm.
And that he was born in Hawaii in 1961. There was a birth announcement in the local newspaper. Questioning Obama's status as an American citizen was a bridge too far even for other populists in the Republican Party, like Sarah Palin, at least at first. And yet, despite this, Trump's pressure forced Obama to allow his long-form birth certificate to be released to the public. Obama, though, would get his revenge at the White House Correspondents' Dinner in 2011.
Donald Trump is here tonight. Now, I know that he's taken some flack lately, but no one is happier, no one is prouder to put this birth certificate matter to rest than the Donald. And that's because he can finally get back to focusing on the issues that matter. Like, did we fake the moon landing? What really happened in Roswell? And where are Biggie and Tupac?
After Obama roasted him in a room full of journalists and politicians, Donald Trump privately seethed and plotted his revenge. He finally got serious about running for president. What we are listening to now is the walk-on music for Trump as he descended down the escalator at Trump Tower on June 16, 2015, to announce his bid for the presidency. It is a Neil day, you can tell, because his lines that would later in the campaign prompt rapturous applause are met with silence.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. But
we all know what happened that year. Trump performed a hostile takeover of the Republican Party and then won a squeaker against Hillary Clinton. In one sense, the election had a kayfabe quality. The Clintons attended Trump's third wedding to Melania.
Okay, kayfabe, it's a wrestling term for pretend.
Bill had golfed with Donald. Trump and the Clintons were plutocrats who went to the same galas. They were part of the same world until Donald Trump came down the escalator in 2015. And then all bets were off. The election was vicious on both sides. Trump's crowds would chant, "Lock her up." Trump showed up at his second debate with Hillary with an entourage of women who had accused Bill of sexual assault. Hillary, to her credit, threw everything but the kitchen sink at her opponent. But it's worth lingering for a moment on her most enduring line of attack.
Look, Putin, from everything I see, has no respect for this person.
Well, that's because he'd rather have a puppet as president of the United States.
No puppet.
And it's pretty clear.
You're the puppet.
It's pretty clear you won't admit that the Russians have engaged in cyber attacks against the United States of America, that you encouraged espionage against.
Now, remember, Americans hate a liar, but they tolerate a bullshitter. And in this respect, Hillary Clinton is not like her husband or Trump. On Twitter, during the campaign, for example, Clinton touted an exclusive story from Yahoo's Michael Isikoff that reported an ongoing FBI investigation into the Trump campaign. What Hillary Clinton did not post on Twitter was that that story was generated through opposition research that her own campaign had purchased. That opposition research, collected by contractors working for a former British spy named Christopher Steele, was full of shit. And yet, for nearly 3 years, the media, the FBI, and the Democratic Party acted as if Steele's allegations were gold.
For the first time, U.S. investigators say that they...
Okay, that's Eli Lake, Trump and the Art of the Bullshitter. Did the Democrats gaslight themselves? Back to the Commentary Magazine crew.
Hi, John. So the postmortems are starting. Kamala Harris finally came out 4 o'clock yesterday and made her concession speech, and she conceded that she had lost the election. She conceded to Donald Trump. She conceded that there would be a peaceful transfer of power. She did not concede that the fight will continue. And don't stop fighting. Keep fighting, because apparently if you want to keep the fire burning, you have to keep the fight going. Otherwise, the fire will go out. I don't know what the fight is, and I don't know what the fire is. And I think in that sense, Matt, you said in our text chain that it was one of the more absurd concession speeches that you had ever heard.
Yeah, it was.
We can't even provide the presumption of grace, as our friend Mark Halperin would say, here at her moment of lowest ebb.
Well, I don't think she did.
That's fine. Let's not extend the presumption of grace.
I'm simply reciprocating. You know, I mean, she gave a 12-minute speech. It was.
I fear that I played this Thursday night. I hope I didn't play this bit.
Because, you know, as John has brought up before, how can she wish well the rules of the man rule, the presidency of the man that she said is a fascist?
The regime, Abe.
What's that?
The regime.
That's right. The regime. Yes.
Yes.
But
that is my.
This is why we should add that just before she gave this very late in the day concession speech, there's no reason she shouldn't have given it in the morning. She did call Trump, and from what we know of that call, she couldn't resist scolding him as well and saying
Them going forward, because, and you're already seeing this in the postmortems, it's so odd. He was so old. He didn't quit. Then he ran. He had a good economy, but people weren't buying it. And then, of course, it was so late, and she only had 107 days, and she couldn't really get purchase. And then he got shot, and that wasn't fair. And the American people are garbage, and everything is terrible. Yeah. And so going forward, they don't.
Argument that you'll hear on MSNBC that the voters are racists and or misogynists, and that's why they voted. And you know, we have to say, MSNBC has been equal opportunity in blaming racism and misogyny, because they're specifically also saying that Hispanic men are misogynist and racist, and black men are misogynists in their postmortem, which is a great way, I think, to appeal to those voters in the years ahead.
Well,
And
they
then-
know MSNBC knows that there is not a single black male in America except Eugene Robinson, who is on, and Al Sharpton, who are on their panels, who is watching MSNBC. So they're not harming their audience. They may be harming the one of the two American parties, but for them.
So David Samuels wrote an essay, and he was at a bar in Montana on election night, and the bar lady won't turn up the volume. She says, you're just going to have to read the subtitles, the closed captioning. Because when we turn up the volume on political matters, it leads to fights in the bar. So David Samuels has to watch everything via closed captioning on election night. And he writes, don't need to hear Trump's stunned-looking critics in the Democratic Party commentariat speak. The expressions on their pallid faces say it all. They are reckoning with the extent of their loss, which is related to their collective sense of self-importance, which is belied both by tonight's result and by their viewership numbers. Having created public trust in their profession over the past decade by routinely lying to their audience on behalf of the government, which they identified in turn with the Democratic Party, the country's self-identified defenders of democracy can fume all they want about Trump's authoritarian, anti-democratic, fascist, Hitlerian leanings. The rest of America is as deaf to their blather as I am. Trump has lost a step or two. His speeches, once gorgeous arias of invective, innuendo, and insult comedy, delivered with the snappy timing of a Vegas Rat Pack headliner, have been transformed into a rambling arabesque, like the musings of a slightly dotty family patriarch at the Thanksgiving table. But Trump has learned a thing or two along the way. On election night, in his victory speech, he graciously shares the stage and allows the importance and accomplishments of others to validate his own role as the master of ceremonies. His timing could not have been better. 5 years of COVID laws, a stagnant economy, direct and indirect government censorship of social media, official lying and gaslighting on every subject from trans surgeries to the efficacy of masking, to the startling number of illegal immigrants entering the country, to the spectacle of a doddering Joe Biden barely being able to remember his own name, and left most of the country dispirited and ready for a change. As it turns out, the American people are still allowed to vote, regardless of whether their betters decry their choices as racist, sexist, short-sighted, and above all, anti-democratic. It is a paradox that the country's genius-level elites routinely fail to acknowledge because they are all profoundly in agreement. We must protect our democracy from these evil anti-democratic forces, American voters who vote for Donald Trump against the expert guidance of their betters, meaning us. And David Samuels argues that the real power during Joe Biden's term was Barack Obama. I don't believe this. I think Barack Obama was too lazy to be pulling the strings behind the scenes, but that's David Samuels' opinion. So David Samuels writes, after Donald Trump left, Barack Obama stayed in Washington and continued his role as unelected party leader during what had been advertised as the Biden presidency. Obama's method of avoiding scrutiny from the pliant D.C. press was entirely in character, alternately drawing back into the shadows and then, out of whatever ego weakness, announcing that he was the true mover of events. Free from normal oversight or responsibility, he and his retainers could also avoid answering questions about the size or sources of his personal fortune, which is rumored to be around $1 billion. As a private citizen, Obama doesn't have to answer questions. He can have it both ways. He can have state power with no public responsibility, until he misstepped by compelling Joe Biden to withdraw in favor of Kamala Harris. I believe Biden would have withdrawn even if Barack Obama had done nothing. Kamala Harris, who turned out to be an even worse candidate than a senile old man who had begun to resemble a badly taxidermied deer. Obama broke the unspoken agreement that had put him beyond scrutiny, disappearing the sitting president from the Democratic Party ticket against his will for reasons that were obviously contrary to what the press had been telling Americans about Biden's incredibly acute mental functioning, and replacing him with a candidate that no one in the party had actually voted for required some sort of comment, however brief. Who else had the clout to remove Joe Biden from the ticket? The answer was Barack Obama. Now he was on the hook, not only for Kamala Harris, but also for the more general mess that he and his operatives had helped to make of the country. Everywhere from Harvard University's alma mater where he helped install a repeat plagiarist as the university's president, that's Claudine Gay, I believe, to the Middle East, which went up in flames the moment he was able to reanimate his Iran deal under Biden, which appeared to be even stupider. The party leader's Midas touch in reverse was evident. So Barack Obama is really good at making choices in his own self-interest, but his choices for the Democratic Party have been an absolute disaster. Seeing Americans as one people with a common culture and character shaped by a common history is not something that America's new elites know how to do. So populism depends on a sense that we are one people with a common culture and character shaped by a common history. Elite rule depends upon making coalitions with a divided electorate. So if you have a united nation, which is what populism seeks, right, you cannot have elite rule, right? To have elite rule, you have to have a divided nation so that the elite can pick off various constituencies of the divided nation with which they can ally and take power and retain power. So from kindergarten on, America's elites are taught otherwise. Ivy League universities, the crucible in which the new class of elites has been formed, base admission and hiring decisions not on measures of objective performance, but on their ranking in the ever-shifting hierarchies of party-sanctioned identity groups. The ability to sort Americans into bureaucratic categories like BIPOC, MENA, LGBTQ, and other alphabet soup constructions is the defining skill of Obama-era elites. So populism stands for a united people. Elite rule stands for dividing Americans up and then making coalition alliances with various segments. So the elites have a mastery of in-group codes that help the Democratic Party manage its own top-down constituencies, which are regimented by political operatives and NGO, non-governmental organizations, paid for by billionaires, embodied in bureaucratic regulations, executive orders, census categories, other legally binding schemes meant to overcome historical American notions of equality. So the Democratic Party could not win national elections, right, if there was a unified America. Right? Democratic Party success depends upon Americans dividing themselves up into all these different categories rather than being America first. Now, in one night, election night, the Obama machine, which he'd used to run the country, including the prestige institutions and the media, through a combination of bureaucratic capture and social pressure, accentuated by control of large tech platforms, was finally melting down. No wonder the press was in shock. None of the lines that had been given could be reconciled with the numbers on screen. A reckoning would surely come. So surely now is the time for Barack Obama to leave Washington and to exit American politics. Now that his shadow presidency, the Joe Biden presidency, which proved to be even more counterproductive and chaotic than Trump's first term in office, has gone down in flames. Meanwhile, the gap between what America's elite believe, what the rest of the country believes, has never been wider. The bigger lesson is that America is just too big, too wild, too destructive, and too rooted in the idea of individual freedom for any self-styled elite to ride the horse for very long without being thrown off. And the Commentary Magazine crew has a fairly similar analysis to that of David Samuels.
This is great because the gentry class, that's
where they're going.
That's their bread and butter.
And then finally, and for me the most interesting, is the Biden folks versus the Obama folks. And that relationship, that rivalry between Biden and his team and Obama and his team is now entering a new phase in the relationship, with the Biden core group of insiders saying that, one, the only person to ever beat Donald Trump is Joe Biden, right?
That's one.
That's one. Two, you forced Biden out. And three, you gave us this nominee who was designed in a Berkeley chemistry lab to be the
Berkeley McGill
chemistry lab, to be the epitome of West Coast out of touch limousine liberalism. Yeah. And you expected us to win. And the Obama folks are coming back. This is why I just love this. Obama folks are coming back and saying, well, your guy gave us the inflation and the border and embarrassed everybody in the debate in June. And so what the Obama people will say, like Axelrod and Pluff, is that Biden dug a hole so deep, Harris couldn't climb out of it. And that debate is so interesting. Yes.
You are quoting David Pluff.
Yes.
Who, of course, came onto the campaign to help Harris and just said, their team was so great. Jen O'Malley, Dillon, they were so great.
Yeah.
But the hole was just so deep.
We couldn't do it.
Couldn't quite climb out of it. So it had this fantastic quality, this tweet, of being it was Brutus is an honorable man.
Yes. Literally a graven image is written here, right? It's like the whole.
You know who's right about everything in this? The closest person to being right is actually Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
And that's because the class discussion, which the Democrats love to bury because they like to blame billionaires, even though they are the party of billionaires, workers. They talked in the abstract about unions and backbone of America, et cetera, but then they condescended and said, but we're going to divide you up by race and by union membership and by all these different gradations. And that was sort of Trump's genius. He spoke to those workers as workers. He didn't care what color they were, what identity they adopted. And that's actually where his background as a admittedly dodgy businessman nevertheless was a contrast, because neither Waltz nor Harris has ever worked in private industry, has never had to make a payroll. And there was some way in which they spoke that it was so far away from discussing free enterprise or how the economy works.
But or Joe Biden for that matter. So we should get to that too.
Okay. Let's bring Kip and Claire Khaw into the chat. Kip, what's on your mind today?
Hey, man, not too much. Just a quick point of fact. When you replay some of my old talks, it reminds me of how often I misspeak. Like I said, there was 1,000. There's only one religion. Well, there's 1,000 different religions because there's 1,000 different cultures. There's only one truth that's somehow buried within most of them. That's really the point I had there. Did you have a good weekend?
I did, and I think I recognize that that's your point, that there's only one truth, and that all religions, or many religions, contain that one truth. I'm highly skeptical, but I recognize your point.
And then,
what is that one truth, Kip?
Yes.
What is that one truth?
I guess that Claire Khaw and everybody else, they've got just a little piece of the divine inside of them, that whether they acknowledge it, and sometimes, like when I'm seeing Sunny Hostin on The View, I have to remind myself that she has that piece of the divine inside her. And like I've told Luke before, that doesn't mean you have to alter everything. I just encourage Luke to pay attention to the splendor of the universe, and if it ever winks at him or leads him towards something, don't be afraid. Lean in. He's plenty old enough. If he was gonna, he's already passed a certain part of his life, and he's on the second half of his life. So if that's something ever comes upon him to explore, I'm encouraging him to explore that. I may not have answered your question though, Claire. Sorry.
Yeah, but Luke is an Orthodox Jew. I'm not sure what your religion is, Kip.
I'm not religious at all. I'm not religious at all, Claire.
But then, I thought we were talking about religion because you were talking about God and the divine spark in all of us.
Yes. It's in, the whirling dervishes of the Sufis, some of the Shintos. It's in a lot of the Eastern religions, the kind of thought that I have, but in the West, it's buried more. It may be in the Eastern Orthodox Church, the way I believe.
Do you think so? Do you not think that? You mentioned the Eastern Orthodox Church, but it's Christianity, and don't you think Christianity has failed the Westerner?
Yes. I think it has been perverted, but again, places like over there where the Eastern Orthodox Church was, that was really the only remnants of truth that were running around, other than here and there, maybe in places like Chartres Cathedral, you know. So they've done a great job of obscuring, you know, the true meaning of all of it. So that's one of my.
What is it? I mean, you're talking about God, and you know, basically, you must logically conclude that there is only one Abrahamic God, or don't you? Maybe you're a pagan. I'm not sure.
I guess I probably don't have God like personified like that. I don't have it associated with any particular faith. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I get it that, you know, everybody all over the world is afraid of death, and they invent gods to transcend their mortality. And the Abrahamic God is the most powerful God conceivable. And there is rivalry amongst the Jews, Christians, and Muslims as to which religious group is the correct one. I mean, that's how I see religious conflict.
Well, I would
Is this
say,
how
like,
you see it too?
sort of, yeah. But I see like with Luke, I see that, you know, he's a Jew, but I see that the true mystical core of Judaism is going to be found like in Kabbalah or in the Zohar and that sort of thing. And you know, he may not be interested in that. He may not, but the way I see it, Judaism has been watered down. I mean, probably because, you know, maybe it offended other cultures or whatever, but it's been watered down to just a social gathering. You know, I don't know as much about Luke to know whether he goes to one of those synagogues that has valet parking or not, but it's social hour.
But it's not. I think all the religions have been watered down, but they have principles, right? I mean, I guess if you're going to be, you know, if you want to distill Judaism into a principle, it would be the principle of avoiding and abominating idolatry. And then I guess we have to consider whether, well, what the problem is with idolatry, if it is indeed a problem.
Right.
I mean, but you were talking earlier about the universe and creation, and the strict Jewish view is that God and his creation must not be confused, otherwise we will fall into idolatry. And that's why Jews take such a strong position against worshipping a man.
Yeah. And so would I be worshiping a man by saying that everyone has a divine spark, and it's just that 99% of them don't realize it? Is that?
I mean, the thing is, like, you know, bad people are also part of humanity, and you know, we need somehow to make sense of, well, the rules, right? I mean, this is how we're supposed to distinguish ourselves, or you know, join the right religious group once we've worked out what the problem is.
Right. And that's the thing, you know, picking up sticks on Sunday and all that. That's one of the things, my problem with religion is it might give someone the scaffolding that doesn't maybe have the intelligence or the strength to see things for themselves, but it's such a limiting experience. It's so dogmatic, where it, like you hinted to, it left the realm of linking anybody towards any celestial truths, and now it's just all about you know, the here and now, the material, this and that.
But don't you think that Jews are kind of, I mean, a lot of people say they are the problem, but don't you think they could also be part of the solution once we've worked out what the problem is?
I don't think so. I mean, maybe, but I don't even think Jews know the reason for their chosenness or whatever. You know what I'm saying? That they don't. Most of them. You think Bernie Madoff was had even a thought about bringing the light to the world? Do you think about?
But he's not. He's not a righteous Jew. I mean, why don't we just distinguish Jews between the righteous ones and the unrighteous ones?
Well, I try to with Luke. I try to tell him, beware of Netanyahu, or you're going to have another SS St. Louis, just like you had in 1939, where everybody says, "Sure, you got problems, but we don't want to deal with them." So all I can do is, put out a caution flag every once in a while when I see Netanyahu stepping over the line. You
don't think Netanyahu is following the instructions of Washington?
Probably.
I mean, I really don't think the Israelis would do any of the things that they're currently doing now if it were not for the unwavering support of America.
Right. Well, that's been going on all my life. You know what I mean? I've just kind of learned that this Israel thing is a head scratcher, because just when you stop paying attention,
I don't think it is. I mean, if you see Israel as an American colony, then doesn't everything become clear?
A little more, but Luke says, I've asked him, if there's more to the story, lay it out for me. Let me know how they're not a hindrance to America. Show me the light if there's more to the story. And
I haven't done that. I've never tried to make the case for a strong America-Israel alliance. There are people who do, but I don't have that knowledge at hand, and it doesn't feel. It feels too tendentious and self-interested for me to try to make that case. I welcome the discussion whether a strong America-Israel alliance is aligned with America's best interests, but I've never tried to make the case that it is. I don't think I have the knowledge. I don't have strong reason to believe that it is, and I don't have strong reason to believe that it isn't. I mean, I certainly see arguments in both directions, but I don't feel like I know enough. And I also don't like arguing for something that's so self-interested.
Right, because like I know, we're entering the realm of speculation because there's nothing in print that we can fall back on. You know what I mean, Claire and Luke?
I mean, it may be a valuable service for the United States to have this alliance with Israel, and there may be all sorts of reasons for it that I don't see. I do know the price of it. The price of it was 9/11. The price of it is a lot of hatred for America in the Arab Islamic world. The benefits of it, there's defense cooperation, there's intelligence cooperation, but I am not prepared to make the case for why America needs a strong alliance with Israel.
Right. And then parsing that down, instead of just talking about Israel, talking about Jews, you've always, to me, used the excuse of those high IQs as the reason why it had to be a Jew, Arnold Rothstein, that fixed the World Series. It had to be a Jew, Epstein, that did what he did. It had to be a Jew, Weinstein, that did what he did. Whereas I see a lot of the links as, man, they sure do like to pervert a lot of stuff, and I'm not just talking about sexually pervert, but I'm just talking about just perverting everything. Everything is on the table to be perverted. So that's one thing that I've always thought was a curiosity about the group that you've aligned yourself with, Luke.
Right. So can you think of any people that doesn't do terrible things?
That don't do terrible things?
Yeah. Can you name me a group that doesn't have terrible members?
I don't know.
I guarantee you cannot name me any group that does not have people within it who do terrible things. And certainly there are Jews who are doing terrible things, but you have to add up the advantages that Jews bring along with the detriments that Jews bring. So you have a lot of technological innovation, you have a lot of entrepreneurial innovation, you have a lot of scientific innovation. Jews gave the United States nuclear weapons. Right. You had estimates that if the United States invaded Japan, it would have cost 2 million American lives. So by harnessing Jewish intelligence, you got 2 nuclear weapons that were dropped on Japan, and up to 2 million or more American lives were saved by doing that. I would say that was an advantage for certainly those 2 million Americans and those who love them.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but there's a negative side to that. When you warm up to that one particular group, you have to wonder why it is that they seem to be at the core of all the movements that weren't so good for America. The sexual degeneracy, the feminism, stuff like abortion and birth control and pornography. And what that guy, you had that great quote of why that guy out in Hollywood, why they'd love to pervert. You know what I mean?
Because they hate Jesus. That was Al Goldstein. He says because we hate
Yeah,
Christ.
yeah. You get what I'm saying? You get what I'm saying? And the Civil Rights Act and Immigration Act and the rise in divorce and deindustrialization. Now, it would be wrong for me to like blame the Jews for all this, but I hate when you keep looking under rocks and you're like, man, something more than IQ must explain, that the root of so much of this stuff is wearing a yarmulke. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I don't think that's something you and I are going to figure out today, you, me, or Claire. But I did want to mention, if I could back up just a few minutes, someone you were reading was castigating Obama. And I'm glad other people noticed that if it was left to the Obama types, they're going to just group us into left-handed people and vegetarians and baseball fans and then just castigate us for not voting the way they think we should vote. I think if anybody paid attention to shows like The View and MSNBC, they are not doing a reassessment. They're not doing any introspection. They're basically saying everybody but them is dumb.
Yes, I
I
completely agree. No, you're right. There's zero introspection shown so far by the elite news media. Quite a lot of introspection made by practical Democratic Party politicians, but none shown yet by the elite news media.
And what do you call that? Joie de vivre, with that love of joy?
Yeah,
What was that? Okay.
Joie de vivre, the love of life. It's a French phrase. Americans are much more open with their emotions than most countries.
Freud and others, when they came to America, they hated the effect that it had on their psyche. And I don't know, that's one thing that did change for me since 2007. It's like every Saturday I have to go spend, not have to, I want to, I go spend part of the day with my mom. And I get out there with all the people in their shiny metal boxes fighting for parking spaces. And I do question the point of it all, of course, Claire doesn't live, I don't think Claire lives in America, but America's a unique space where everybody has to buy so much shit that we all got mini storage spaces to hold our excess shit because we couldn't keep it all in our garage and everywhere else. And we don't live in London-sized flats either. We generally have big houses, but have more shit than our houses can hold. So,
okay, so you question the purpose of all the shopping. Is there any human endeavor that one could not say, I question the purpose of it?
I mean,
you can
I'm
say
sure
that about anything that people do. You can question the purpose of it, and any platform or program or policy or group that you endorse will also always come with a significant downside. There's no such thing as a blessing without a curse.
But I would say, now Claire is a woman, so this wouldn't affect her. But I would say that people in America, if they have something like male pattern baldness or erectile dysfunction, they're going to be particularly bothered by it in America and develop a complex because the whole society is built around telling them how incomplete they are. And they just heighten it to to such a point. I just wonder if the same thing goes on to where everything right down to people's happiness is commodified by telling them how incomplete they are, without this product, or your wife really wants you to have hair, but she's not going to say it to you. She really wants a man that can get a hard on, but she's not going to say it to you.
What countries without advertising would you like to live in? There's probably not a lot of advertising in North Korea. Would you like to live in North Korea?
I don't know. I don't know if they got the kind
There
of
are no
diet.
countries that you'd like to live in that that ban advertising. All right, any country that you would like to live in has a huge amount of advertising. It's up to the individual to harness how they use it.
Well, you lived in Australia, and Claire lived somewhere else. Maybe she's been to America. Did y'all notice the way you're just accosted with advertising and gimmickry the whole time in America? Did you not notice that, or is it the same way in Australia?
It's about the same. It's about the same in Australia, and it's about the same in the United Kingdom, and it's about the same in any country you'd like to live in. I mean, your choice is North Korea or some other hellhole if you don't want to live in a society saturated with advertising. Claire, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just agreeing with you that it's sex and shopping everywhere, even China, that is supposedly communist, and maybe in more conservative countries it is just more disguised. But the thing is, we sort of need sex to reproduce, and we need shopping to buy stuff that we need, and maybe many of us don't know the difference between what we need and what we want. What we need is finite, while what we want is unlimited, and we don't know how to make the distinction anymore.
Claire, would you disagree with me that most people are they're led around by these desires so much that someone like me questions how much free will they actually have?
Well, it's probably true that although in theory we all have free will, not many of us will ever use it. They will not, put two and two together and act on the conclusion that it leads them to. They will be always looking around to see which way their herd is going, because they don't want to be on their own.
So on what basis, Kip, would you say that you have more free will than the average person?
I don't have all that stuff working on my head like that. You know what I mean? And it probably maybe it's to a detriment. You get what I'm saying? Because I had squashed. I've actually got things in my house I probably should be finishing, but I've just decided, I'm not going to play that game. And like I say, I had asked you what it takes to get by in Southern California, and I was amazed by how much it costs. People probably don't even believe me when I say I live on about $1,000 a month. But and that's not out of necessity. That's out of an unwillingness to jump into that shit.
And Claire, you called in probably with something on your mind. What were you thinking about?
You were talking about kayfabe when I was in the kitchen, and it made me think that people think politics is entertainment, which is maybe not quite the idea.
Well, if people operate in their self-interest, they're not going to spend much time on politics, because the ability of one person to influence an election or to influence national or even local politics is extremely small. So it would make sense to me. It would be rational for people to treat politics as entertainment, given that there's nothing that they can do in all likelihood to change it. So why would one not treat politics as entertainment? Unless one had a particular predisposition, such as we do, and that we make out of politics a hobby and a cause.
Well, I've always thought if you don't think politics is working for you, then you should work out where it went wrong and why your preferences are not being acknowledged. I mean, I try to make it simple for people. I think maybe men might agree with me that their preferences are not being prioritized. And I think Kip was complaining that he hasn't got a woman because he hasn't got enough money to attract a good woman. Well, isn't that what you were trying to say, Kip?
No. I'm not.
I'm surprised. I
I'm
thought
not
he was.
When it comes to women, I'm sure there's a Mrs. Right out there. I haven't written that off, but
I thought he was saying you're being made insecure by the advertisements that you see.
Oh yeah, I would say that I feel sorry for the guys. I feel sorry for guys that do have like erectile dysfunction and they do have these little problems, because I feel like I live in a society and a culture that does nothing but highlight that in order to get them to rectify it. You know, you must rectify that by all means possible. If you need Ozempic, go get it. Go get it. Nothing's acceptable, you know, unless you just take care of the problem. So
how firm are your erections, Kip?
This probably isn't a good conversation in front of Claire, but they're good. They're good. And
Wow.
in fact,
I said, wow, because you're not a young man, so you're a rock when you need to be.
Yeah. In fact, the time where I shift over from I would like to go swimming to I must go swimming is the point when that does begin to flag. You know, that I'm not going to say that hadn't happened, but I'm saying at the moment the flagging erection is noted. I go jump in the pool and I'll start my little swim routine up. Instead of just walking or whatever, I'll amp it up, and it has a direct 1-to-1 effect on my vigor. I can't say any other thing does that besides swimming. I'm sure there's other sports that'll make that vigor come back, but with me, if that ever happens, I can start swimming, and within 4 to 6 weeks, just wake up with a happy morning wood, just like the good old days.
And Claire, how much of an effect do you think you had on the last UK election? Do you feel like you swung some seats in one direction or another?
Well, I would if people adopted my ideas, but I'm saying that the herd is going with democracy, and I do make a point of saying at every opportunity that I reject representative democracy, and I see it as the problem. And even if nothing changes when I say it, it is still a problem, unless you disagree with me on that. Luke, do you disagree?
Well, my point was that it's irrational for people most of the time to think that they can change politics. And so the reason that we engage is because it's a cause for us, or it's a hobby for us. It's something we enjoy doing, or it's something that we want to give our best to doing, but that our chances of changing national politics are very, very tiny.
I do see that, but I see myself also as a political theorist, so I see no problem in working out what the problem is. And then, I mean, you're saying don't even bother because people won't care.
I don't have any strong position on democracy. I think for many peoples, it's a good thing. For other peoples, they're not suited for it. In some situations, you need a xenophobic police state. In other situations, some wide open, democratic, egalitarian society will be more adaptive. It depends on the people, and it depends on the situation.
Yeah, I'm saying that representative democracy panders to the preferences of the average female voter, and most of them can't be reasoned with, and they won't respond until they feel discomfort or pain. And we would, I'm sure, all prefer to avoid problems rather than be faced with dealing with long-standing social problems that have been left to fester for so many decades.
Okay, Luke? I need you guys to carry on this conversation for 2 minutes. I got to take a break, but I will be listening. So go ahead, Kip. Say anything.
Okay, Claire.
Yes.
Are you old enough? You sound like you have some experience in your voice. Are you old enough to remember the culture pre-2000?
Yes, I think so.
One of the things that maybe Luke and I disagree on is I think that the culture is basically rotted and that I am missing nothing by stepping out of said culture. What's your feelings in the pre-2000 culture versus now?
Well, I have no problem with agreeing with you that the culture has rotted and is worse now. But I'm also saying that the culture will always be wrong if the laws are wrong, and the laws will always be wrong if the moral system is wrong. And nobody wants to talk about moral systems.
Right. No. I'm with you, because the culture is a reflection of the morals and ethics of the people.
Of ordinary people.
Right. So, I was very happy to see the apparent almost nil effect that the Democratic Party, they have all the elements of culture, all the ball players, all the movie stars, all the singers. And I don't know, it probably had some effect, but if it wasn't nil, it wasn't much. It was 5% or less. Wouldn't you agree that as far as impressionable voters, they didn't change many minds? Do you agree?
No, I think we're just meant to keep voting for, either of the parties, and their policies are the same, but occasionally they have but they would have different leaders, right? But it doesn't matter which party we vote for, because the policies are always the same until Trump came along.
Right. And beforehand, and across the pond, sensing your accent, the guy with the bad teeth, Farage, same thing with him, right? Was he a change agent? Was he a true change agent there where you live?
Well, we don't know, but he takes a position against immigration, and so leaving the EU was meant to be taking a stand against immigration, but it obviously it didn't work, because there's even more immigration now, and you can choose to say there was no point leaving the EU, or you can think it's just not allowed. So we never really left the EU because America didn't allow it. And the EU is really an American project anyway. Mm-hmm. It's an imperial project. China actually said when the referendum was being conducted that they preferred to deal with the UK as part of the EU, because it made their paperwork easier. It was for their administrative convenience that they wanted the UK in the EU. But at least they said, well, we wouldn't want to presume to tell you what to do. It was Obama who told Britain that, don't you be thinking you're going to get a special deal from us. You're going to go to the back of the queue, British people. And that's what he said. And then Trump came along and said, well, if I were British, I'd vote to leave the EU. And so Trump gave the British people the courage to vote to leave. Mm-hmm. And Trump basically represents the interests of the Western proletariat. And that's why he has supporters and admirers who are not American or even white.
Right. Elliot a few weeks ago mentioned being in people's business office and them having a doll or an action figure, on their desk or whatever. And you surely had to notice the proliferation of this, where everybody lives in stunted adolescence since about, I don't know, it seemed to come on since about 1980, and it got real bad in the past 25 years. What do you think explains any of that? What explains
that? Not parents. If you're not parents, you will be perpetually in your arrested adolescence. And this is a problem with perpetual adolescence and arrested development.
We were talking about culture, and at least from my side of the pond, it's just another Spider-Man or Batman or Superman or Star Trek or Star Wars. This is shit I left behind in the 70s, I don't understand it. To me, it's like some cultural black hole where originality just ended probably 30 years ago, but I think I just noticed it 25 years ago. when they started having things like reality TV shows, and it's like, what happened? All the ingenuity and thinking is just gone at this point.
Yeah, it's a kind of, we're in a zoo and we're entertained by looking at ourselves in the zoo, like the Truman Show. I don't know if you saw that, but okay, I'm saying the problem is democracy itself, because how it works is that the female voter will always be pandered to because they are the group that is most capricious and volatile. But if you win the female vote, you win the election.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, the media is geared towards pandering to the female voter. And that's why the preferences of men are routinely ignored. You don't matter.
You ever watch that garbage in America called The View, the morning show that's devoted for women? It's devoted to women.
No, but I can imagine. We have something similar. Not that I watch it.
Yeah, they always have like The View, The Talk, The Something. It's probably called The Something over there in England too. So it's
okay. I'm gonna jump in. All right, let's go to final thoughts. Claire, any final thoughts for today?
I dropped in to congratulate Americans on the stunning win of Donald Trump. I'm glad that the few Americans that I knew whom I nagged to vote Trump did actually say I voted Trump, but there were only about 2 or 3, I think. But anyway, many congratulations. I hope that he secures his legacy by reading the farewell speech of George Washington when he warned Americans against political parties. And therefore, I'm saying that in order to secure his legacy, he has to ban all political parties. And that's going to be quite a job. I don't know if he will ever get round to it. I hope he does. And when he does, things will really start to change. Otherwise, he'll just be there for 4 years and then he'll leave and everything will go back to what it was again, but worse.
Can she expand on that a little bit? What would she like to see in lieu of that? I'm just having a hard time conceptualizing this, Luke.
Okay. Claire, what would you like to see in lieu of political parties?
It's not that there will be no election. So I'm saying there will be all the important groups who will obviously have to elect themselves a leader, married parents, married fathers, married mothers, unmarried, spinsters and bachelors. They will have their own groups and they will lobby their government to get them to address their problems and their issues. And, including farmers and, business organizations and academics and, all the important groups. They will have their own leader to lobby for their own interests and their problems will be addressed in the general context of promoting the national interest. And that's how I hope things will eventually become.
Does she have a historical reference? I mean, was this done back in the guild days of Europe? I mean, where is she? Has this been done successfully? Do we have something to view it?
I don't actually know, but this is how I believe China is supposed to be run, through consultation with these different groups.
Okay.
Luke, thanks, Claire. Yeah, Kip, final thoughts.
Low IQ. This will be a low IQ thought, but just think back to like about a year ago when Florida State was 13-0. The Florida State Seminoles had won the ACC championship.
Yes.
And they had lost their quarterback. And they got, in spite of being the only undefeated team, they got left out of like the Final Four to go play for a championship. And they were forced to like play Georgia in the 5-versus-6 match. And they got beat 63-3. Yes. And of course, you could understand they were let down. They were let down. So I was just thinking, well, how are they going to react next year? 1-9.
Wow.
1-9. and got beat 52-3 yesterday by Notre Dame. So we live in a time now where, I guess if you like football, there was a time in the past where teams could load up their teams 2 deep, 3 deep at almost every position and really be a football factory. Now that we have this name, image, and likeness that goes on in the NCAA, there is no more great teams. I don't even know if there's any good teams. You know what I mean? The teams that's going to win the championship will be the one that's has the least glaring problems because they're not 2 deep and 3 deep. You know, they're over the course of a 12-game schedule, they get beat up. Guys get hurt. And it's really broadened to where instead of having 5 or 10 great teams, you have like 30 teams that could be good, but we'll see. They could get beat up. You never can tell. So really, I just thought Florida State, man, that should be something where everybody says, maybe I should talk less shit when I'm 13-0 because we could lose 10 out of the next 11, just like Florida State did.
Right, and they came in like a top 5 team, certainly a top 10 team. That's how they were ranked.
And just lost every game. Anyway, that's all I had.
Yep. Thanks, bro. Great to talk to you. Thanks.
See you, Claire.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
See you guys. Bye. Okay, let's get a burst here. Howard Kurtz, media buzz.
His failure is absolutely breathtaking, and not just because they were counting on and largely rooting for Kamala Harris. The deeper layer of malpractice here is the complete and utter failure to understand the president-elect's appeal and why the Democrats were so badly shellacked. Bottom line, the media misjudged the country, with some exceptions. As the numbers rolled in around 10 p.m. Eastern, and Trump had 6 times as many electoral votes as Kamala Harris and was winning the contested Sunbelt states, some commentators tried to keep hope alive.
If that number tells us a story about how people voted in a deep red state, it could be a very good night for the Harris campaign.
But by early morning, that fantasy evaporated, with Fox projecting that Trump would win Wisconsin.
The Fox News decision desk can now officially project that Donald Trump will become the 47th president of the United States.
That message obviously was not enough to get enough white women to vote for Vice President Harris, a fellow woman.
I can't help but wonder if the American people have given up on democracy.
Now, some tried to understand the political earthquake, while others vowed to keep fighting as part of the resistance.
Fundamentally, this is a rejection of the Democratic Party, my party, Kamala Harris, and a left-wing ideology.
There are a lot of people experiencing legitimate pain and sadness and fear right now.
The very thing that Donald Trump was accusing Biden of, that he had weaponized the Department of Justice, that he was sicking the federal cops on people, is what Donald Trump actually wants to do.
He's now the president. I'm still not going to say his name.
Not exactly a deep-rooted examination of why the media were unable to understand their fundamental role in this election when it comes to what's his name. Oh, and the Huffington Post screaming headline, "The Nightmare Returns." I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is the coverage, while others urge the press to keep fighting as part of the resistance.
And now it's going to reach a new level of importance because we're going to help our country heal. We overcame obstacles that nobody thought possible, and it is now clear that we've achieved the most incredible political thing. Look what happened. Is this crazy?
A fundamental principle of American democracy is that when we lose an election, we accept the results. We owe loyalty not to a president or a party, but to the Constitution of the United States.
No one believed that Trump was a Hitler or fascist. No one believed the smears, not even the Democrats who made them.
The free press needs to give the people of this country assurances that they will not become state TV, that they will stand and fight together.
Liberals woke up this morning confused. How could a dictator win the popular vote and take the Senate and probably the House? The answer is simple. They lied to you.
We know how to do this. We've done it before. We endured those 4 years once before, and we resisted every day of those disgraceful Trump years in the White House.
And some are still grappling with their grief.
The hardest thing is that I look across this country and tens of millions of people fell for this. I'll snap out of it, but I'm in a very, very dark tunnel right now.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Our Lady of Media's failure here to understand Donald Trump's appeal to working class voters and the growing disconnect with Kamala Harris's party.
Yeah, I think, and I always say this, but there's a too close alliance between the left media and the left campaign operatives, right? And I think the message is Harris Walls, obviously. You saw some of those signs.
Yes, I saw
It's hectoring, it's lecturing. It does not allow for the idea that anyone could reasonably assess that another candidate is working better for them. And I think this electorate was a y'all are full of it electorate. I don't believe what you're telling me. And if you continue to lecture me about things I can see with my eyes, whether it's the border is secure when there's millions of people coming across, whether it's the economy is really good according to Goldman Sachs when you're hurting and you can't buy your groceries, whether it's that Biden himself is totally fit to do the job and it turns out he's not, or Harris is like amazing and it turns out she's not. These things people see with their eyes, and when they're told that they're hateful for having concerns about what's in front of their eyes, that makes them angry, and I think it makes them willing to go the other way.
By the way, these are the people who called the campaign flawless. Alex Wagner, Sonny Hostin, Joy Reid. Women. Trump campaign resented the assumption that almost all women would vote for Kamala Harris. And that didn't happen. I mean, she won by 7 percentage points, which isn't much when you consider the gender gap among men.
Yeah, I think too many, again, in media and in left-wing sort of consultant class, talk only to each other, and I exclude my friend at the table here who is happy to sit down and talk with others. If you don't just talk to each other and like very rich liberal friends, you would see, as I did, that it looked to me like the shy Trump voter was going to be a suburban woman voter, educated, who maybe hadn't voted for Trump in the past. And it was because abortion and Liz Cheney was not enough for them. It wasn't enough of a play. There were other things they were concerned about.
Nobody shy at this table. Megan.
Criticizing Trump and criticizing a look at some of the things he did do.
About all the channels, ABC, NBC, CBS, MSNBC, CNN, all pro Kamala. All of those channels, they had an opportunity. Those were free advertisements for her, and she still lost.
So, Mary Catherine, I mean, the coverage was gushing, supportive, while obviously continuing a relentless assault against Donald Trump. And so, looking back, did that contrast with reality?
Yeah, I think it did. I think I just saw today that in some of the exit polls, J.D. Vance was the only of the four to have a positive rating coming out of some of the exit polls, which to me, that speaks to the gap between what media sold you about who this person was and then who people saw on the debate stage. And that happens a lot with candidates if you have a legacy media that is not paying attention to other people. I think Megan's exactly right. One of the things that the press needs to do moving forward and should have done in this campaign is not be so emo all the time, whether it's to celebrate Harris or whether it's to have an emotional breakdown over Trump.
Everything was an 11.
I think it takes away from your critical faculties, and people do not believe you when you are always at 11. I've been saying this since 2015, and they refuse to back down, and I hope now is the time.
All right, well, you're coming in at about 7.5 right now.
Yeah, that's an appropriate level.
So,
in the end, if in fact that shouldn't be your job, but that's what you're trying to do, more curiosity, they would have looked at Joe Biden more critically.
When Kamala Harris for a month, which I thought was a real tactical misstep, sort of hit out from the press, there was a demand that she sit down with a television interviewer.
I mean, my call would be make curiosity cool again, right? If the press had had more curiosity, they would have looked at Joe Biden more critically and figured out probably much earlier and told the Democratic Party much earlier, hey, maybe you guys should run a primary, right? These things end up hurting you and hurting your allies in the end. If in fact that shouldn't be your job, but that's what you're trying to do. Joe Rogan works because he's a curious guy who talks about things without self-censoring, who talks about the things, by the way, he's not even a conservative. He's a liberal. He's a Bernie guy. But he's curious and he's sort of freewheeling, and a lot of people want to hear that. The reason people want to hear that is because they feel like they've been told what they cannot say.
Beyonce, it was, it made news. And as soon as she lost, it was like, oh, she was too cautious and she wasn't authentic and she didn't separate from Biden. So It sounds like the press knew this and was covering for her.
Yes, I think they were pretending while she was running because they were in favor of her, and there were things that they should have been critical about but weren't. And in fact, some of those critical things, if they had talked about them, might have helped her adjust in real time and do more interviews, local, national, what have you, to get your feet under you and get better at this kind of thing. But the truth is, and James Carville, who I know is very upset, also had a correct observation, which is that on The View, where Sunny Hostin, an absolute Kamala ally, asked her a very simple question: what would you do differently?
And that turned out to be?
It is the question you exist to answer, is what James Carville said, and he's right, and she couldn't answer it. That's not a flawless candidate.
I can't think of a single thing, and obviously it wasn't from one of her White House correspondent. Jackie Heinrich, welcome.
Thanks, Howie.
Are Harris and Biden sources coming to you with all kinds of complaints and leaks about the other camp? Because it seems like this anonymous sniping is everywhere.
Yeah, it is hard to quantify just how many opinions I have in my text messages right now. Everybody is finger pointing. And I think that it's because, to some extent, people were surprised by this outcome. But then now that it's happened, they're all saying, well, but of course, and sort of peeling back the hood and looking at the problems that they could have resolved. It runs the gamut. I mean, I would say that Biden world sources have different perspectives than Harris world sources. There are the Obama people, obviously, as well. But sort of a continuing theme here is that.
Okay, I think Commentary Magazine crew actually does a better job here.
Because they're good at spending your money, but they don't actually understand how
they're
to
not even good
well.
At spending it, because let's just talk, not federal money.
Well, no, exactly. She went in debt for her campaign.
There's one salient detail that we got last night, Neb. I'm sorry to have interrupted you. Her campaign raised $1 billion in 3 months and has ended up $20 million in debt. Now, that is a synecdoche for American post-FDR liberalism.
This is why I think, in retrospect, the giveaway for the college student loan giveaway, it's not debt relief. You all know I hate it when people call it debt relief. The debt transfer, which was struck down as unconstitutional and which Biden boasted he was going to defy the Supreme Court on, those continual efforts to have red state America pay off blue states loans, which is, I think, how a lot of people who didn't go to college see that program. It's like, wait a minute, I'm not getting a break for the cost of my tools or the cost of my apprentice program. And they have a, in the most extreme case, you're a gender studies major and I have to pay off your PhD loan. That was how people saw it. And you know what? Some of the best ads earlier in the campaign season were comparing the plumber to the, dance and movement therapist degree and saying, okay, who here is contributing most to society? That really bothered, I think, voters who might otherwise think their economic interest would lie with the Democratic Party.
And on top of that, you had a nominee for the Democrats who decided to make her closing argument, not in Pennsylvania, not in Michigan or Wisconsin, not even in Georgia or North Carolina, but in Washington, D.C., in a location which will have voted for Kamala Harris by what, like 96 to 4?
I think it's almost like 98. It was
98
like
to 2, right? That tells you everything you need to know about American politics, right?
Well, it's going right to your base, though.
It is. No, that's what I'm saying.
You're not even going to have a protester there.
Because there's no protests. You're going to get a crowd, and you do it in front of the White House because something in your data is showing people aren't quite comfortable with her in the White House. And of course, you, as part of the Harris campaign, interpret this as saying, oh, it means they can't picture a woman in the White House. No, it means people can't picture Kamala Harris in the White House because she's given them no reason to think that she is up for the job, right? I mean, and has never provided any distinction between herself and a president whose approval rating in the early exit poll, was 41%. And look, we all say, on election night, we always say, don't trust the early exits. And of course, then we all kind of secretly look at them. Or John, you publicly saw that Biden's approval was 41%. That was the first sign to me to say, that's not really good for her.
Okay, but there's another interesting point in CNN.
But also, this is this is the McDonald's question too, is it not? I mean, it's not like, oh, I believe she worked at McDonald's, or why would she lie about it? It's like we had this debate because we were looking for a scrap of evidence that she had working experience.
Right. And the only evidence provided by the campaign to the New York Times after the brilliant reporting of the Washington Free Beacon was her close friend who said that she had heard from Shamala, the late mother, that this job had happened.
Oh, I thought you were calling Kamala Shamala, but you're actually referring to Shamala.
Yes.
Inauthenticity stuff goes beyond the, the merely, all of that. It is like the whole thing was a trick. Biden was senile. She's an idiot. She's a very unimpressive person. She spent her entire life standing on the shoulders of other people, getting jobs that she probably wasn't entirely suitable for or qualified for, pulled across the finish line in elections in a state where once she got on the ballot where she was, there was going to be no contesting them. One time in her life, she took a giant risk and ran for president and raised a huge amount of money and exploded on the launch pad.
But
a slow 9-month explosion on the launch pad where first one rocket failed and then the other rocket failed. Yes.
This is the reckoning, I think. This is where I actually have a little bit of sympathy for Kamala Harris, the person. There has been no experience in her life where she was at all mentally prepared for the fact that the Democratic Party, especially in blue state California, which had, as you said, swept her along on a brilliant career, and she'd been told, wow, you're amazing, you're the future, it's incredible, now you're a senator, now you're this, now you're that. She was not mentally prepared for the fact that her own party's coalition, it's like termites had attacked and rotted them from within, and it just crumbled because it's not just her or her campaign. The entire Democratic Party apparatus assumed they could take for granted the coalition that worked for Obama, that kind of worked in its odd way for Biden, and it doesn't work anymore. And so that's a reckoning that they have to have. I doubt they'll do it, although there have been a few voices that already have said we need to look at.
Okay, here's a quick video on Passport Bros.
Is the collective term for a movement among Western and specifically American men who are increasingly pursuing mating and dating opportunities abroad. These are guys who are flying to places like South America and Southeast Asia and the Middle East in order to access sexual opportunities that they argue aren't available in their home country. And I'm going to respond to this phenomenon through the lens of my recent experiences spending a month in the country of Japan. Now, I'm not very knowledgeable about this phenomenon, but to be honest, there was always something about the Passport Bros movement that felt a little sleazy and pathetic. Without really examining it, my perspective was similar to the prevailing attitude, which was something like this movement was for guys who were too low status or unattractive to beat out their intrasexual competition here. They couldn't get laid in the States, so they basically engage in geo-arbitrage to leverage a relative advantage that wouldn't exist in their home country. My attitude was something like only guys who couldn't get what they want from women here would need to uproot their whole lives and travel halfway around the world, which kind of made these men out to be conniving beta males. That was my attitude before spending a month in Japan. That is no longer my attitude now. Having spent a month in that country, I think I better understand where this movement might be coming from. And I definitely don't think it's just for loser men who can't get laid in America. Allow me to explain. From the perspective of my interests and preferences, the quality of the women in Japan was significantly superior to the quality of the women in the Bay Area, like not by a little, by orders of magnitude. Let me break down some of the various factors that go into that statement. First of all, the women in Japan are slender and physically healthy. I spent a month in some of the largest cities in the world, and I must have seen 10 overweight women in that entire time, half of whom were little old ladies. And these overweight women weren't morbidly obese. They were like plump, maybe 20 or 30 pounds overweight max. Most Western women literally couldn't buy clothes in Japan. The vast majority of Japanese women are slender and physically fit, which is appealing because it's not only attractive, but it indicates a compatible value as well. Like, I want people who care about their health. Second, these women are feminine. They wear dresses and heels and makeup. They tend to dress more conservatively than Western women. No tight clothes, no showing a lot of skin. The feminine ideal there seems to be like softly elegant, flowing and modest and dignified. And these aren't 1950s housewives. These are women who, for the most part, are working professionals. They have modern ideas. They are educated and accomplished, but they haven't thrown out more traditional conceptualizations of female beauty. This is not something you can easily find in the West anymore, and you can't find it at all in the Bay Area, at all. And I find feminine women very attractive. It resonates with me and inspires me.
You know, the easiest place to find feminine traditional women within a traditional community, right? If you are a part of a traditional community, you will have no problem, even in the San Francisco Bay Area, finding feminine traditional women.
To be even more masculine. Now, before I go any further, if you're liking what you're hearing, please. The woman I interacted with there was extremely warm and friendly. They were receptive to conversation, and they seemed to enjoy, or at least very effectively pretended to enjoy, speaking with me. Even more, they were solicitous about my feelings and seemed concerned that I should enjoy the interaction as well. I didn't experience a single indifferent or disrespectful word, tone, or glance from a woman in a month. This made approaching and talking to women in Japan a much less fraught experience than it is in the US. The women I spoke to seemed to take pleasure in the attention and in the dialogue. Nothing about the interaction indicated that they were annoyed or offended that I was interested in talking to them. Fourth, while a kind of chivalry exists in Japan, it's an inverted version of what we have here. In Japan, men come first, women come second. It's difficult to appreciate how deeply the romantic ideology permeates our manners until you go to a completely different culture. For instance, one day I was walking towards the main entrance of a building at pretty much the same time as a woman. My natural instinct was to get there first and hold the door open for her. However, when I did so, she refused to walk through it, making a show of great embarrassment. And I later realized that in that culture, it would have been embarrassing for her if I had allowed myself to disrespect myself in that way for her sake. Another example. Many years ago, I spent some weeks in Japan studying Buto dance in an immersive program. The first night of the program, at the General Assembly, we heard a long speech on how the organizers miscalculated the number of futons they needed for the students. Apparently, there would not be enough beds for everyone, so the women would have to sleep on the bare floor without cushions or sheets until the problem was rectified.
Wow. That sounds like quite a difference in culture. All right, this is from the YouTube channel Psych Hacks. A lot of thought-provoking material on there. All right. This is from the Foreign Affairs publication, their podcast.
You know, I think what is really valuable about Heilbrun's book is that he makes this powerful distinction between kind of realist geopolitics of one sort or another, which, as we were just saying, has often led American politicians of a variety of sorts to have pretty close and sometimes even, you know, kind of grudgingly admiring relationships with totalitarians, authoritarians of all sorts. But I think what he's really interested in is a set of kind of cultural resonances. And those, to me, seem really very powerful and very much a part of what Trump's doing. So some of that is just a kind of attraction to a world that is hierarchical, right? Where certain people are at the top and others are at the bottom, and you have this kind of vision of a hierarchical society. I think a lot of it has to do with masculinity and this vision of what it means to be a strong man, as we were saying, as well as a strong man, right? And then I think you have other factors like a certain kind of religiosity and a vision of a hierarchical religious state. And then, of course, race is one of the key characteristics. A lot of the figures that Heilbrunn cites in his book were race theorists of one sort or another, as they would have been described in the early 20th century. And of course, the same holds true for gender, right? It's a kind of patriarchal vision writ large, not only for the family, but for the nation. So I think it's those kind of cultural resonances, which are, of course, also political, that really distinguish this particular right-wing tradition.
You make a further distinction in your essay where you say,
okay, so name me one society that's not hierarchical. Name me one society where different groups don't demonstrate that they have different gifts through empirically verifiable statistics. Name me one society where there are not significant male-female differences. She talks about these things as though they are unique to just some societies, while in fact they are present in all human societies. So not very strong observations there by Beverly Gage. All right, LA Times. No jumping, no shouting. Beverly Hills High issues new rules after students celebrate Donald Trump's win. So the messages came before a TikTok video went viral showing many students at Beverly Hills High celebrating. And you'll even see a security guard joining in, holding up a Trump banner. But Beverly Hills is more than 50% Jewish. There's a strong Persian Jewish community there. Donald Trump gets a lot of support in Beverly Hills. And the kids here at Beverly Hills High were just elated by Donald Trump victory. And so the school administration is tamping down. You're not supposed to jump. They've instituted rules about jumping. I remember I once had a female boss who told me not to jump. Like when I got excited, I'd jump. And she had to institute rules saying, no jumping, no jumping. So male exuberance is now illegal at Beverly Hills High. Why? Why did they have to crack down on the jumping and the celebrating? Because it might make other students feel unsafe. Great. Okay, what else do I have lined up for you? What other beautiful insights? All right, play a little bit from All In Podcast.
I think that the mainstream media has been working hand in hand with the Democratic Party to propagate and move forward an agenda that tried to vilify Donald Trump. I did not know that when I initially encountered him in 2015 as a candidate. But what you're supposed to do as an adult is once you start to see a pattern of behavior, this is for the safety, security of your family. This is about how you think about economically taking care of your family. Like, you have to re-underwrite decisions from first principles. You must be prepared to change your mind when you see important information. And I have said this till I'm blue in the face, but I'll say it again. If I think of all of the people in the political infrastructure of America that I have met and spent time with, from Bill Clinton on, I remember sitting and having dinner with Barack Obama the day of Brexit and getting a note that he read, and he said, oh my gosh, and says, wow, the UK just pulled out. I was sitting across from him that dinner. I've been with all of these people. The Democrats only come to me to ask me for money. The only politician that has ever called me just to have a conversation, just to say thank you and be kind, the only one has been Donald Trump. Isn't that incredible? Of all of the people, every other person has only ever called and asked me for money. So what does that mean? I think what it means is that there has been a concerted effort to perturb the way that you interpret who he is. Separately, there's been a concerted effort to prop up whoever is sitting against him in opposition. And I think this is an opportunity to finally acknowledge that if you trust these traditional legacy sources of helping you to get to a decision, you're going to get tricked. There's that.
All right, that's from the All In podcast. This is New York Times Matter of Opinion, 3 lefty columnists, and Ross Douthat, another Trump Republican.
Narratives in 2016 was that Trump was part of who we are in the sense of representing just the return of white supremacy politics in backlash to America's first black president. And it was fundamentally American, but in the darkest, most racist and reactionary possible way. And I think that becomes a harder argument to make, with Trump basically presiding over a relative racial depolarization of the parties. It's early. We don't know, the exit polls are going to be wrong. We don't know exactly how many Hispanics and how many African Americans he won. But this was not as racially polarized an electorate as in 2016. Whatever else Trumpism has done over the last 8 years, it has proven that right-wing populism can be a pan-ethnic phenomenon. And if you don't like right-wing populism, you can be upset about that, but you should maybe take a little comfort in the reality that, again, whatever you think this represents, it's something more complex and, yes, more diverse and multicultural in some ways than just white reaction.
Well, see, I want to tweak that, though, because...
All right, so this is Matter of Opinion. This was recorded in the very early morning after Trump's victory. I think this is Lydia Polgreen here weighing in.
Because what he did is he created that coalition with a huge charge of xenophobic nationalism.
Right. You can't be a fan without also developing an irrational hatred of your biggest competitors. You can't be a nationalist, right, without taking on some xenophobia, right? Xenophobic nationalism is repetitive. Nationalism, by definition, will contain a considerable element of xenophobia. If you have any kind of in-group identity, you are going to have some irrational fears and hatreds for outgroups. There's nothing unique about the Donald Trump coalition with regard to xenophobic nationalism and sexism and racism. Right? These are just all endemic parts of the human condition, but they're thrown at Trump supporters as though they are some piece of garbage.
And a pretty big charge of sexism.
Right. So if you recognize that Kamala Harris would have made a terrible president of the United States, you are violating her hero system regarding sexism.
So he brought all these groups together so that they could hate on a different other.
Oh, so give me names of strongly identifying in-groups that don't hate on a different other. You can't. There aren't any. By definition, having a strong in-group identity means that your in-group overwhelmingly will be filled with some negative feelings and fearful feelings with regard to outgroups, particularly threatening outgroups.
Which, okay, I guess we can credit him for that, but it doesn't actually give me much comfort. I mean...
Oh, that's such a shame. My God, Trump's victory doesn't bring a left-winger much comfort, even though it was composed of a multiracial coalition. So sad.
What I saw this election as, it was basically a rage off.
Oh, a rage off. And that's supposed to be a bad thing, right? If you love anything, you are going to be enraged by that which threatens what you love. There's nothing unique to the Donald Trump coalition here. This woman brings nothing to the show.
So you had Democrats on one side appealing to women who understandably have...
Yeah, so when Democrats appeal to groups, it's very understandable, right? They are making a logical and rational and moral appeal. But when Republicans appeal to groups, then it's just pure hate.
I felt like this ticket in particular has been incredibly nasty about...
Really? Really? Donald Trump, J.D. Vance ticket has been incredibly nasty about women? That's absurd. You have to cherry pick a comment here and a comment there.
About women, right? And it got worse and worse and worse as we went up toward the end. And then...
Really? The nastiness towards women got worse and worse and worse up towards the end? On what basis do you say this? She has no basis. She's just making it up. It's just her feelings.
And on the other side, you had Trump, whose shtick has always been, I am your vengeance against the elites.
All populist programs stand for I will be your vengeance against elites. Elites depend upon a divided populace. Populism depends upon a united people. Right? With a divided populace, the elites can form coalitions with other segments of society and continue to rule. But in a populist nation, right, the people will rule, the elites will not.
Everything that's going wrong in your life, I'm going to make better. It's not your fault. We're going to blame the other.
Right. Is there any group that doesn't tend to blame other people for their problems? It's not something that's unique to the Trump coalition.
And that was a combination of immigrants and snooty elites and things like that. So you had a rage off between a group that had a particular demographic they were hitting, and then Trump, who was hitting everything. Anything you're mad about, we're going to...
And if Kamala had won, that wouldn't have been a rage off? When Barack Obama won, that wasn't a rage off?
Give the finger to. It doesn't matter if you're mad about housing.
The only thing that holds the Democrats together is rage at white men. That's the only thing that holds this coalition of the fringes together. They loathe, they hate white Christian men in particular. Only thing holding this woman's coalition together. But she is not able to see that.
Prices or trans athletes or whatever. So
if you don't want your little girl having to share a bathroom, all right, with some dude who now thinks he's a woman, you're a hater.
So I think he tapped into this incredible pool of rage that was sitting there for a whole lot of reasons. And in part, I think had a lot to do with a COVID hangover and the really long tail of what that did to this country, which we will be dealing with for years. But it doesn't make me feel like he created a kind of positive coalition.
If you feel positively about anything, you will automatically feel negative about those things that threaten the positive things that you venerate. It's not like this is some unusual politics that Trump was running.
Because Amnon Abramovich, I think it was in 2000. It was the end of the first Netanyahu government, so it must have been 99. And Amnon Abramovich, the pundit, the senior pundit on Channel 2, said, "Tam Idan Netanyahu." It's the end of the Netanyahu era. And he added, Netanyahu is going to leave the stage of history with not even a footnote. And here he is. So, you know, Yinon Magal, your favorite host on the Patriotim show, whenever there is something, there is a new scandal, and we will talk about the new scandal. Whenever it's cleared, he teases Ben Caspit with Tamidan Netanyahu. It's the end of the Netanyahu era once again. But I think it may well be. So I wanted to contribute something to the Babylon Bee in the spirit of the election in the United States. A story that would be headed. The headline would be Kamala Harris blames defeat on Donald Trump.
Not
also true.
Not bad. Not bad. I heard an interview with Maxine Waters this morning, the veteran Democratic politician, and she basically, that was basically her analysis. Like everything in Babylon Bee, it's so true. It's funny.
Yeah.
All right, should we get to the news here?
Yeah, let's get to the news.
I've got on the news. I've only got three things, and they're also the three things that we should be talking about. So on Sunday night, Gadi, an Israeli court permitted publication of the names or the name of the primary suspect in a severe security affair that is roiling Israeli politics. His name is Eli Feldstein. The court also permitted publication of the names of the fact that 4 other suspects had also been arrested, some of whom hail from the defense establishment. The investigation was launched after there was a suspicion that classified and sensitive information was removed from the IDF, information that was liable to severely damage state security and to endanger information sources and to undermine the ability of the security agencies to obtain the release of the hostages. That's how it's being explained. I suspect you have a different understanding of the matter. The court noted that during the investigation, all of those suspicions that I just mentioned had been significantly reinforced. I'm very much looking forward to your interpretation of this, Gadi. So on Tuesday, as you noted, there was a presidential election in the United States, and Donald Trump won. He becomes only the second president to win a non-sequential second term.
After Grover Cleveland.
After Grover Cleveland. That's the only thing I know about Grover Cleveland, by the way. Also, on Tuesday, Prime Minister Netanyahu fired Defense Minister Gallant, and he announced that Gallant would be replaced by Foreign Minister Israel Katz, who in turn would be replaced by Gideon Sa'ar.
Yeah.
Netanyahu's decision spurred tens of thousands of Israelis to head into the streets in protest. Were you among them, Gadi?
No, tens of thousands. Yeah.
Okay. The large numbers of protesters into the streets and the decision was decried by opposition chairman Yair Lapid as quote unquote an act of madness. Gallant's ouster is broadly perceived in the media as being part of a two-pronged plan. I suspect you're not going to agree with this, Gadi. One, to shore up the coalition by passing legislation that would sweepingly exempt Haredi men from military conscription. And two, to fire Chief of Staff Halevi, Shabak Director Barr, and other top security officials, so that Netanyahu can consolidate his hold on power. And that, Gadi, is so that when there's an investigation into the causes of October 7th, so the press is telling us, the political echelon will be strengthened over the professional echelon, and will be able to exonerate itself. That's the interpretation being put out in the media. I suggest you have a different take. Over to you.
I do, but first, whenever
I suspect you have a different take.
You have to be careful with numbers of demonstrations, because as I learned as a veteran Peace Now demonstrator in my youth, the media reports Gallant affair. But Mike, why don't we start with the meaning of the election? Because this is everybody feels that this is a true historic moment, and I feel we can't discuss it without saying something about what it means for America. And since you are my American intern, why don't we start there? What do you think the meaning of the election is broadly?
I think it is indeed historic. I think it is huge. Trump has remade the Republican Party. He's created a new coalition, and the full extent of it we have yet to understand, and I think it's still developing. But it really is a seismic shift.
Identity groups were also divided across class lines. And if you look at it from an Israeli perspective, it's the same thing. Trump and Netanyahu, they represent the same phenomena and also the same stamina to keep fighting against those powerful elites, because Donald Trump it's a phenomenon. It's not just.
It's the same. You see it globally. I think Modi in India, Erdogan in Turkey, Netanyahu in Israel, Orban in Hungary, Le Pen in
Meloni in
France,
Italy,
Meloni in Italy.
Austria.
It's all the same thing.
Yeah,
it's all the same thing, and it's a nationalism versus globalism.
Fonte, whom I admire, as you know. On the one side, there is national democracy, and on the other side, there is anti-democratic liberalism or pseudo-liberalism or progressivism. But the point is that these people who speak in the name of human rights and the downtrodden and identity politics are anti-democratic, and they're trying to marginalize, disenfranchise the lower classes.
What to Iran? One of the things is that they believe their ideology. They are absolutely captured by it, and this relates to their foreign policy as much as their domestic policy. They believe that they represent the people and the best interests of the people. They fundamentally do not believe in the consent of the governed. This is what you're getting at. They believe in the managed society, but they believe that the well-managed society, they represent the interests of the working class people, even though they're unfamiliar with them truly. The traditional left-wing ethos is still part of their worldview, but they don't actually live it in any real way, and they don't have any way to actually communicate and negotiate with the working class, because they just tell the working class what its interests are, which are to support them, and they have the media behind them. So just to finish our thoughts on this, Gotti, I think I do hope that this is the fall of Barack Obama. I do believe he is the most powerful person in American politics, or was. I think Donald Trump is now, but he was until yesterday. The most powerful person. I hope he leaves the scene. Kamala Harris clearly was a puppet of a democratic machine, which includes this media machine. And that, to me, one of the biggest losers and the most important losers of this election was the media